He never thought a red car cutting him off would change his life forever. When Ryan got home early, he found his wife, Carrie, with her boss, Sean, in their living room half naked. Rage surged through him. He kicked Sean hard, leaving them both screaming. That night, Ryan didn't just lose his wife, he lost his trust. But instead of falling apart, he teamed up with Consuela, a woman with her own vendetta against Sean. Together, they devised a plan to ruin them. From secret recordings to financial sabotage and even a staged kidnapping, they left no stone unturned. This is a story of betrayal, vengeance, and ultimate justice. The owner of the house where Gilchrist crew was converting the garage into a spare bedroom was thrilled with the work and told a friend about it. Ryan, not sure what was happening, took the owner's phone. The friend on the line wanted an estimate for remodeling his kitchen as an anniversary gift for his wife. Ryan's small construction company needed the work, so he arranged a meeting for just past noon. The friend's house was across town, and the quickest route passed near Ryan's home. Normally he wouldn't have stopped by, but a red car cut him off, forcing him into a left turn. After that, it was easier to go home and take another route. Ryan wasn't too upset. Bringing his laptop with its helpful spreadsheets and design program would make the client meeting easier. He could use it to give an accurate estimate and show a 3D model of the finished kitchen. He knew he could manage without it, as he knew the prices by heart and could draw a good sketch, but it was a small decision that changed his life. When Ryan got home, he was surprised to see his wife's car in the driveway. Carrie worked as a bank teller and had gotten several raises. She worked half days on Saturdays, but today wasn't one of her scheduled days off. Wondering why she was home, Ryan entered the house through the quiet kitchen door, prideful about keeping things in good repair. Everything seemed normal until Ryan saw his wife in the living room with another man. Carrie was topless, her clothes draped over the couch and her skirt pushed up. The man's body blocked her hands, but her arm was visible, moving rhythmically. They were too engrossed in each other to notice Ryan. Ryan froze, stunned to see Carrie with another man. The man moaned about waiting so long, and Carrie teased him. Anger filled Ryan. He moved forward swiftly, stepping into the living room and kicked the man hard in the crotch. The man moved closer to Carrie, which made her get hurt too. Both of them collapsed in pain, unable to scream at first. Ryan, his face twisted in rage, stepped closer, ready to deliver more punishment. But he realized it wasn't necessary. The man started screaming in a high-pitched voice, followed by Carrie's cries. They fell to the floor, writhing in agony from the intense pain. Marshall and Carrie were in their own worlds, screaming so loudly they almost damaged their voices. Ryan stood back, watching them writhe on the floor, their screams piercing his ears. Seeing Carrie's exposed lower body made Ryan feel sick. His shouts of anger and humiliation mixed with their cries of pain. Later, when Ryan thought about that day, he realized how close he came to using his Glock. He was proud he didn't pull it out. Every part of him wanted to use it on the people who betrayed him. He even wondered if he would have used one bullet on himself. The gun held 14 bullets, which was more than enough. The urge for violence didn't bother him much then, and it still didn't now. Ryan was raised by his grandfather after his parents died in a car accident when he was 7. His mother's father was half Comanche and very close to his own grandfather. Ryan learned that his great-great-grandfather had been a young warrior who fought in many raids in Texas in the late 1800s. He died protecting the Comanches' last stronghold. Ryan's grandfather took him camping in the wild places of Texas, showing him secret spots known only to their family. Ryan loved the solitude and wildness of those high plains. It called to him, and he often wished to return. Life would be simpler there, just him and the wilderness, needing to survive. The thought of harming the two lovers didn't bother him. He was actually upset he didn't do more. But this was the 21st century, and such actions weren't possible anymore. The bigger problem was how he felt after discovering Carrie's betrayal. The images of her with another man haunted him, making him feel less of a man. It took him 6 painful weeks to find a therapist willing to help. Dr. Christopher, in his 70s, wasn't easily intimidated and turned out to be a godsend. It was a tough 4 years, but he and Carrie managed to stay together. Carrie did everything to show she wanted the marriage to work. She showered him with affection, respect, and admiration, offering sex at all hours. She was deeply remorseful, and Ryan eventually stopped thinking about divorce. A short separation ended when Carrie found him at a motel, tearfully pleading for him to come home. They went to counseling for more than a year, trying to fix their marriage. Despite this, cracks remained. Years after counseling ended, their lovemaking never fully recovered. Casual sex improved, but the special connection they once had did not. It took 1.5 years for Carrie to notice Ryan avoided touching her right breast, the one he saw the other man fondling. This realization led to another round of counseling, which included individual sessions. Eventually, their sex life improved, but things were never the same. Something fundamental in their relationship had broken and never came back. Carrie insisted they buy a new home because there were too many painful memories in the old one. They found a 2-story house in a better neighborhood. It was too big for just the two of them, and they were always behind on the housekeeping. They kept the house, thinking they would grow into it as they worked on their relationship. They talked about having children, but Carrie didn't want any right now. Over time, these discussions faded away. They had talked about having a baby right after getting married, but Carrie had career plans that didn't include kids. When she let the subject drop, Ryan decided never to bring it up again. This decision left him feeling empty, but he didn't know what else to do. Eventually, Ryan got over his anger and disgust about Carrie's betrayal. He reminded himself that neither of them had been virgins when they married. It wasn't easy, but he forced himself to think of the man he caught Carrie with as just another past fling. Things improved, but something in their relationship was still missing. They never discussed her affair despite their counselor's efforts. Neither of them wanted to go into the details. Ryan was going to turn 33 in July, and some days he felt much older. He found some gray hairs in March, which upset him. Carrie just shrugged and said they made him look distinguished. Ryan felt bothered by this, thinking it was a term for older men no longer attractive. Carrie reassured him he was married and didn't need to worry about that. He felt a bit better, but still uneasy. As spring went on, Ryan felt their marriage might not last. Carrie, usually affectionate, started arguments, criticized him for no reason, and seemed distant. He didn't panic the first few times, but as these incidents continued, he knew what was happening. She was cheating again, and all the signs were there since her recent promotion. Ryan had read many books on relationships and infidelity, most bought with cash from used bookstores. Some were by doctors and counselors, while others were by retired private investigators. He found the latter most useful. These books described signs of cheating and ways to catch a cheater. Ryan hid these books in a cupboard in the garage where Carrie never went. Recently, he reviewed the books to ensure he hadn't missed anything. Alarmed by Carrie's behavior, he hid a voice-activated tape recorder in her car. Early one Sunday morning, he retrieved it and discovered his suspicions were correct. The recordings revealed conversations with girlfriends and phone calls to someone named Sean. The last conversation confirmed it was Shawn Michaels, Carrie's boss at the bank. It didn't surprise Ryan much. Carrie's first affair had been with a co-worker at her old job, Marshall, the supervising teller. They had grown close over lunches and slow periods. It wasn't a stretch to see Carrie cheating again with another boss. As he looked closer, he found many signs of her infidelity, all mentioned in the books. Carrie thought she was being clever, but Ryan was not fooled. Ryan quickly caught on to what Carrie was doing, even though he didn't know all the details right away. His experience from her first affair helped him recognize the signs. Once he was sure, he began to distance himself. He let each lie hurt him, allowing the betrayal to eat away at his love for her. He wanted his feelings for Carrie to fade fast, and they did, even quicker than he expected. Carrie's cheating gradually destroyed Ryan's love for her. When he couldn't find any love for her, even during lonely nights, he knew he was ready to move on. "Hey, handsome, want a booth or a table?" The friendly waitress's voice brought Ryan back to reality. He had been lost in thought while waiting to be seated. "Whatever," he replied, not caring if he sat at a booth or table. "How about somewhere near a window where I can see out, but it's still quiet?" "Sure, let's go this way," the waitress said cheerfully. Ryan followed her to a booth against the rear wall, away from the regular customers, separated by a chest-high partition. "Can I get you some coffee, honey?" she asked, as Ryan squeezed his tall frame into the booth. "Black, hot, and lots of it," he replied. The waitress smiled, pleased. She didn't like fancy coffee drinks, and seeing a man who wanted plain coffee made her happy. She filled an insulated pitcher at the counter and brought it over. Ryan had started coming in every morning and evening since last Thursday. The waitress had learned he owned a small construction company that did renovations, interior remodeling, and some building restorations. He dressed well, usually in a suit, but his hands were calloused, showing he had done hard work in the past. "What can I get you this morning, sugar?" she asked after pouring his coffee and placing the pitcher on the table. "Orange juice, Western omelet, hash browns, biscuits, and a side of ham," he answered, pointing to menu item number 6. She expected that. He had ordered the same thing the last 3 mornings. She took his menu and order slip and walked away. Ryan watched her slide the order under the metal order wheel for the cook, who nodded. The waitress then greeted more customers as the line grew longer. It seemed like the whole town decided not to cook breakfast this Monday morning. The cafe buzzed with conversation, clinking dishes, and occasional laughter. The smell of cooking eggs, bacon, sausage, biscuits, and cinnamon rolls made Ryan's mouth water. Ryan smiled. He liked the small town and the friendly waitress who seemed typical of the people here. Most folks he met were reserved at first, but became outgoing and friendly once they knew you. Yesterday, the waitress had even sat and chatted with him during a slow period, which impressed him. The cafe was busy now, as rural Texans still started their days early to avoid the heat. This habit would continue even after Ryan's crew upgraded the courthouse's air conditioning. Though just 50 miles from San Antonio, with its 1.5 million people, this small town hadn't changed much since the late 19th century. The interstate ran nearby, but the regulars hardly noticed, just as their grandparents probably ignored the cattle drives after the Civil War. Ryan often wondered what his life would have been like if he'd been born 150 years earlier. He shook off the nostalgic thoughts as the hot coffee helped bring him back to reality. He eyed the coffee suspiciously. It was strong enough to float a horseshoe, much like the ones his crew had found while clearing land for a new garage. Ryan was glad he had come to this small town to oversee the renovations. He enjoyed the good coffee and the change of pace. Ryan was still a small-time contractor, but his business had grown significantly over the past 4 years. He had expanded enough to need an office downtown, which he hated. He often joked that he no longer did any useful work, having traded it for a desk job. He had also earned a degree from UTSA, attending night classes and taking some daytime courses to finish. He now had a Bachelor of Business Administration and Resource Management. Some courses were useful, but many seemed irrelevant, requiring him to memorize answers that didn't apply to the real world. The frustration of those classes was fading, but he knew he wouldn't pursue a higher degree. While waiting for his breakfast, Ryan's mind wandered. He appreciated the warmth and friendliness of the cafe, a stark contrast to the cold atmosphere at home. His thoughts avoided home, focusing instead on his business. Things were going well, and he had even hired a secretary and a part-time CPA to handle calls and payroll. He now had 8 crews, 52 men and women, many of whom were ex-Marines and soldiers known for their maturity and responsibility. Ryan's business thrived on word-of-mouth advertising, and his team's dedication and quality work impressed clients. He had 3 crews working in the small town, away from the big city. Ryan told himself, and anyone who would listen, that he was there to supervise the work. In truth, he was hiding from his wife, unable to stand the sight of her anymore. He muttered to himself, "Fool me twice, shame on me. No way that's happening again." He couldn't accept Carrie's second betrayal. He wasn't sure why he had stayed after the first, but he knew he wouldn't do it again. He had a plan and was ready to execute it. After discovering the first tape recording, Ryan made it a habit to place a fresh tape in his wife's car each morning and listen to the used ones later. He was shocked to hear Carrie criticizing him, their friends, and their life together. She even lied about their history, claiming he had mistreated her, which never happened. Ryan didn't understand why Carrie was doing this. He realized that many of their friends had been exposed to her complaints and lies. He could see it in their eyes. They avoided him, were reserved, and even withdrawn around him. It was clear Carrie's stories were causing this. Her disrespect changed his plans. Initially, he had intended to confront her and leave, but he knew Texas was a no-fault state, and he needed a better plan. His thoughts returned to the friendly cafe, where he found a sense of peace and normalcy away from the turmoil at home. It would have been simple to wait 60 days for a judge's signature on the divorce papers, but now, Ryan wanted proof of Carrie's adultery. He needed a divorce trial to tell his side of the story. He planned to have his lawyer challenge every motion from Carrie's lawyer and propose hard-to-meet conditions. The hearings and counterproposals might drag on and even bankrupt him, but he didn't care. It would stop Carrie from getting a share of his growing construction business. He couldn't easily disprove most of her lies, especially her claims of physical abuse, which she repeated in several phone conversations. Ryan imagined standing in court, tearing off his shirt to show his strong, work-hardened muscles, and asking the judge if a man like him could beat his wife without hospitalizing her. It was only a fantasy, but it kept him from losing his mind. Carrie's deceit ate at Ryan, especially during dark nights. He didn't understand why she was trying to destroy his reputation. She shouldn't be allowed to do this, but he felt helpless. The anger built up inside him, and he knew he couldn't take it much longer without lashing out. He chuckled as he stared out the cafe window, remembering something Dr. Christopher, his therapist, had said. Dr. Christopher had told Ryan he was a bit prone to confrontation. Ryan agreed, and had even stopped carrying his Glock to avoid doing something he'd regret. Now, there was nothing left of his love for Carrie. She wasn't worth risking prison for, even if he shot her or her lover, Sean. He didn't want to go to prison. As he waited for his breakfast, his thoughts wandered. He hated jails. His brief experience with them had been enough. After injuring Carrie's first lover, Marshall, he received a light sentence. 40 hours of community service and 30 days in county jail, with most of the jail time suspended. Ryan's attorney had advised against a jury trial, and the judge gave him an easy sentence. He had only spent 7 nights in jail and worked during the day. After 18 months without further incidents, the judge vacated the rest of the sentence. Ryan had enjoyed his community service, spending hours reading to children at the public library. Marshall, on the other hand, was outraged at Ryan's light sentence. He lost one testicle and the other healed slowly. His wife, however, had told him they already had 3 kids, and that was enough. She even threatened to cut off his remaining testicle if he didn't make it up to her and the kids. They moved to Denver, where Marshall was horrified to learn what Rocky Mountain oysters were. On a business trip to Dallas a year ago, Ryan found a store going out of business in a rundown strip mall. They sold spy equipment but were relocating to a better area. The owner had to sell off his inventory at low prices to avoid expensive storage costs. Ryan bought a dozen lipstick-sized cameras, phone line recorders, binoculars, a good digital camera, 3 VCRs, and other gear for professional surveillance. He only started using the equipment recently. He hid small spy cameras upstairs and downstairs, not knowing where Carrie might entertain her new lover if she brought him home. Carrie had no qualms about bringing Sean into their marital bed. When Ryan went hunting one weekend with her father, Carrie took Sean to their bedroom. Ryan expected her disrespect and had placed 3 cameras in the bedroom which caught all their actions. He compiled these tapes for his in-laws and friends. He also thought Sean's workplace would be interested in videos of Sean working naked on his laptop in Ryan and Carrie's kitchen. Ryan assumed Sean logged into the bank server while waiting for his body to recover. Between their sessions, Carrie and Sean discussed their families and friends. Ryan planned to highlight these parts and share them with those who believed Carrie's lies. He looked forward to exposing them. He had all the evidence he needed. It was just a matter of timing. "Excuse me, sir." "Sir?" The cafe's hostess was surprised when Ryan didn't respond right away. He was usually very alert. "I'm sorry," Ryan said, snapping back to reality. "I was drifting a bit." He blinked, pushing away the unpleasant memories. "No big deal, sugar," she replied. "Listen, honey, we're almost full this morning. Would you mind sharing your table with Connie and little Belinda here?" Ryan looked around and saw the restaurant was indeed packed. Though there were other tables with open seats, his was the largest available. Ryan was about to refuse, but then saw the tall, attractive woman with long black hair, and the little girl beside her. His mood shifted, and he felt glad the hostess had approached him. He took a moment to respond, realizing he was just sitting there. "I apologize," he said, standing up. "I was brought up to be polite. Sometimes I'm just not quick on the uptake." He patted the waitress's arm. "I'd be happy if Connie and Belinda would join me." He hoped he remembered their names correctly. "Thank you," the little girl said, her voice clear and sweet. Ryan had expected the woman to reply and was surprised by the child's confidence. She climbed onto the bench seat and asked, "May I have my booster seat, please?" Ryan, confused, looked at the girl's mother and then saw the waitress holding the booster seat. "I'm so sorry," he said, taking the seat and holding it steady while the girl climbed in. "Thank you," she said, smiling up at him. Ryan was about to move to the other side of the table when the girl interrupted again. "I want my mom to sit over there," she said, pointing to the opposite bench. "You sit here." Ryan looked at the girl's mother, apologetic. "She's too shy and unassuming, isn't she?" the woman said with a grin. She gestured for him to sit next to her daughter. "If it's all right with you, I don't mind," she added. The girl's matching grin decided it for Ryan. "I'd be most happy to sit with you," he told the child, sliding into the booth beside her. He introduced himself. "I'm Ryan." "Consuela Robertson," the woman responded. "And that's Belinda, the terror of the Vargas preschool," she added with a smile. "Mommy," Belinda protested, "that's not nice." Ryan chuckled, enchanted by the woman and her daughter. He shook Consuela's hand, liking its strength and femininity. "Do folks call you Connie or Consuela?" he asked. "I like Consuela," she said, "but Connie is okay too. Lots of people call me that." "Consuela is a beautiful name," Ryan replied. "It fits you better than Connie, I think." "Is it okay if I call you Consuela?" Ryan asked, waiting for her reaction. There was a pause before she quietly said, "I think I would like that." Two older women in the booth behind Ryan stiffened slightly, smiling knowingly at each other. Consuela had moved back home after a bad marriage ended in divorce. Little Belinda was 4.5 now, and this was the first time anyone had seen Consuela showing any interest in a man. Wednesday found Ryan waiting for Consuela and Belinda before he ordered breakfast. When they walked in, Belinda freed herself from her mother's hand and raced to Ryan, leaping into his arms. "Linda," her mother scolded, "you know you're not supposed to do that." "It's okay, Mommy," Belinda said. "Mr. Ryan caught me." She added confidently, "I'm going to sit on his lap today and eat breakfast. Honey, I know he caught you, but what if he hadn't seen you coming? And you don't know if Mr. Ryan wants you to sit on his lap," her mother gently explained. Belinda looked at Ryan, then turned back to her mother. "He does," she said firmly. Ryan cleared his throat and said, "It's true. But to make it official, Miss Robertson, would you and the charming Belinda care to join me for breakfast?" They all chuckled as they arranged themselves around the table. Belinda sat on Ryan's lap for most of the meal, eating from both their plates and resting contentedly against his chest. Toward the end, she got restless when a playmate came in with her parents and ran off to visit, leaving Ryan and Consuela alone. Things felt awkward. "You don't remember me, do you?" Consuela asked suddenly. Ryan looked closely at her, studying her long black hair, flawless fair skin, and dark eyes. He finally said, "Consuela, if I'd seen you before, I'd remember. I don't forget beautiful women." Consuela blushed slightly. "Well, it was only twice, at the bank where your wife works. A long time ago, I cashed a check for you once while your wife stood with you. Then Carrie waved at me another day and you turned around to see who it was, about 1.5 years ago." Ryan shook his head, trying to remember. "I'm sorry," he said. "If I was with Carrie, I was probably focused on her." "So you do forget women occasionally?" Consuela teased with a grin. "I must have been really distracted," Ryan chuckled. "If I was with Carrie, she'd be making sure all my attention was on her." "I understand," Consuela said, meeting his eyes. "How is Carrie these days?" she asked. When a wall went up behind Ryan's eyes, she nodded sympathetically. "You know then," she said softly. Ryan frowned. "I left the bank 2 months ago," Consuela explained. "Everyone there, even the customers, know what's going on." Ryan sighed. "They're not even trying to hide it." "Not anymore," Consuela said. It's become more obvious. Brazen, even. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. No one at the bank likes Mr. Michaels. No one understands what Carrie sees in him. Yeah, I'm sorry too, Ryan said quietly. I've suspected it for 3 months and been collecting proof for a couple of weeks. I think I have enough now. An interesting choice of words, Consuela noted, her eyes brightening. I didn't leave my job in San Antonio the way I implied, she said finally. I left because I filed a sexual harassment complaint against Shawn Michaels, and it went all the way to the main office in Chicago, Consuela said. Ryan had been waiting since Monday for her to open up, sensing there was something she needed to share. After a few months, the complaint came back down. The Chicago office said it wasn't substantiated and they couldn't do anything, Consuela continued, her face flushed with anger. After that, I got bad performance reports. They wrote me up 3 times for minor balancing issues, even though they were temporary and easily fixed. But they didn't do that to anyone else. She paused, fuming at how she'd been treated. Ryan nodded encouragingly. They moved me to the investment banking division, but when a woman came back from maternity leave, there was no spot for me. They made it clear I'd have to go back to being a window teller, working weekends and late shifts. They knew I had a young daughter and couldn't take those hours. Consuela forced a smile when she saw Belinda watching. They let me go easy, I guess, she said. I could quit and get good references or stay and hardly see my daughter. If I pushed the complaint, I'd be blacklisted from working in banks. Her fingers twisted in her lap as she spoke, anger and pain evident. Ryan could feel the ghosts of their pasts sitting with them. Consuela shut her eyes, willing herself to calm down. Hi, Mommy. Belinda's voice broke the tension. Are you crying? Consuela opened her eyes wide to show her daughter she wasn't crying. No, honey, I was just thinking, she said, smiling gently. Belinda seemed unsure but accepted the answer. Tasha and her parents are eating, so I came back. And I'm glad you did, Ryan exclaimed, pulling Belinda onto his lap. Now I'm still not sure where you're ticklish. Belinda giggled as he tickled her ribs and neck. Linda, Consuela said quickly. It's my fault, Ryan interjected. I know better. Belinda, give me a hug and I'll stop. Belinda hugged Ryan tightly. I have a confession to make, Consuela announced. The noise from the children playing was loud, so she had to lean close to Ryan. He had suggested McDonald's because he knew Belinda would love the playroom. You've been wanting to tell me about Carrie and your sexual harassment complaint since Monday, Ryan guessed. Consuela's eyes widened, then narrowed. You knew? She asked, her voice tight. Ryan shook his head. I knew there was a reason Trish sat you at my table. I hoped it was because of my charm, but then I looked in the mirror, he said with a light tone. I figured you'd talk to me eventually, and in the meantime, I was enjoying spending time with you and Belinda. Consuela blushed slightly. That's part of it, she admitted. I guess I should have just told you when I recognized you on Monday, Consuela mumbled. She tried to be mad that Ryan had guessed her reasons for seeking him out, but his honesty was too disarming. I didn't mind, Ryan assured her. I enjoyed your company. I already told you that. He looked at her thoughtfully. What is it you think I can do for you? Consuela took a deep breath. Well, we didn't get to everything this morning. It's not just a sexual harassment complaint anymore. I filed a suit in federal court 3 weeks ago. I was hoping you could testify that Shawn Michaels is having an affair with your wife. She paused, adding, My attorney doesn't know about you yet, but she said if we could show Michaels continued his behavior, it would help. Ryan's face showed confusion for a moment, but then he smiled. I'm glad to help if it will. I'll testify to what I know about the affair. You know for sure? Consuela asked in a low, intense voice. You can say you know Michaels is actually having sex with your wife? Ryan nodded. Oh yeah, I can testify to that. Consuela sat quietly, her eyes filled with sympathy. Maybe you shouldn't, she said hesitantly. There'd be questions and... Ryan smiled, a predatory smile. Consuela, my marriage is over. Our vows were broken before. They've been shattered now. My marriage ended the minute she began a relationship with Shawn Michaels. I've been collecting evidence to show a court, to prove her infidelity. I'm going public with it, to show everyone what she's done. I'm getting a divorce from Carrie to make it official, but it's been over for a long time. I've spent the last few months watching her and letting her burn the love I had for her out of my soul. I don't care for her now. Nothing can embarrass or humiliate me more than she already has. I'm going to lower the boom on her and her lover, and I'm going to do it hard." Consuela saw something in Ryan she hadn't noticed before. His blue eyes had gone icy with anger. She believed him. "It takes a lot of strength to do what you're going to do, Ryan. I think you're someone Mr. Michaels should never have messed with," she said softly. Ryan was startled by her comment, his anger fading. He smiled at her. "You said you have proof. You have pictures or something?" Consuela asked. Ryan nodded. "I've got videotape of them together, tape recordings of cell phone conversations, and other tapes of her talking to friends in her car about her lover. I know the cell phone conversations might not be useful unless she denies them on the stand. But the videos? I have videos of them hugging and kissing, walking into our house, and even in our bed. I think I have a right to videotape what goes on in my house. They're pretty graphic." "Oh, wow," Consuela whispered. "It's so sad you had to see that, but you've got her good, don't you?" Ryan chuckled. "Oh, yeah," he said, drawing out the word. "Got him, too. I haven't seen a lawyer yet, but I have my own suit to file. Carrie's contract has a morals clause. I don't see how Michael's contract wouldn't have the same. That should mean the bank is liable if they don't enforce their own rules and regulations, right?" "I don't do lawyer stuff," Ryan admitted, "but I think we can help each other out. You can testify in my civil suit to establish a pattern of conduct, and I can testify in yours. We might be able to keep my construction firm afloat after the divorce. Texas family law takes adultery into account for property settlements. I was counting on that. Now there's an even better chance of buying out whatever percentage Carrie's share of the business is." Thursday was a disappointing day in the cafe. Ryan was there as usual, but Consuela was not. She had to go in early to open the small-town bank where she worked as the assistant manager. The regulars thought it was sad he was sitting alone, but they didn't notice he had brought a book to read while waiting for his omelet. He wouldn't have done that if he expected company. The book was a Western by Louis L'Amour, which Ryan loved. It reminded him of a time when a man could make a place for himself through sheer will, courage, and not accepting disrespect. In the novel, a young married woman had taken a lover, a bad man good with a gun. Her farm boy husband tried to defend his honor but died painfully. Ryan identified with the farm boy. Despite the consequences, he had tried to defend his marriage and personal honor. It wasn't smart, but Ryan understood his choice. The omelet was especially good that morning. Trish, the head waitress, had asked the cook to include extra mushrooms and sausage, which Ryan loved. He felt special, as not even long-term regulars got such treatment. At Trish's suggestion, Ryan and Consuela met Thursday night at a Golden Corral outside San Antonio to avoid being seen together. After all, Ryan was still technically married, and people wouldn't understand. They planned to file lawsuits against a multinational bank and its regional headquarters. Consuela talked animatedly, waving her fork like a conductor's baton. She said it was part of her Latina heritage. Her grandmother, raised in a small Mexican village, needed her hands to speak properly. Ryan teased that tying her hands would be like gagging her. She stuck her tongue out at him, and he laughed, something he hadn't done in a long time. Consuela was surprised to learn Ryan's great-grandfather was a full-blooded Comanche. She noted that his high cheekbones were the only feature that hinted at his heritage. His blue eyes and blonde hair came from his Scottish and Irish ancestry. They discussed their mixed heritage, and Consuela told Ryan about the Irish dance schools in San Antonio and an annual contest he should attend. He agreed to go if she joined him, and she said she would. "Will the videos be admissible in court?" Consuela asked finally. Ryan shrugged. "I'm sure a good lawyer can find a way. If not, I'll make copies of the DVDs and send them to her family and friends as Christmas presents," he said with a grin. "I thought you had videotapes," Consuela remarked. "I do," Ryan replied, "but I bought a computer to convert them to DVD format." Seeing her confusion, he explained, "First, I played the VHS tapes and recorded them with my digital camcorder. It was a lot of work, but I had to find workarounds. I didn't want to ask for advice considering the subject matter." "You did very well," Consuela said quickly. "You have more proof than I do." Ryan felt good about her compliment, a stark contrast to Carrie's constant criticisms. "I think I can help with your case too," Ryan said after swallowing a chunk of steak. I've got a couple of shots of Sean sitting at our kitchen table, naked, working on his laptop." "Really?" Consuela exclaimed, flushing slightly. "Oh yeah," Ryan replied. "He was logging into a network and doing some transactions. What does he do, anyway?" "He runs the division for high-end personal wealth management," Consuela explained. "He manages accounts for very rich customers, makes investments, tracks trusts, and sends transfers to other banks." "Transfers? Like wire transfers?" Ryan asked. "Yes, but on a much bigger scale," she explained. "Millions of dollars are sent and received every day." Ryan nodded thoughtfully. "They trust him with that?" he asked speculatively, then laughed. "If they could see him trying to enter his password 3 times and screaming like a spoiled child at his laptop when it won't work," Ryan laughed. "I'm not sure they trust him very much at all. He might send a rich guy's money to Timbuktu instead of Tucumcari. He's really not good with computers." Consuela laughed with him. "You saw him do that?" "Yeah. Once he kept trying and it never worked. Kerry came downstairs naked and entered his password for him. That's a no-no. I bet the bank wouldn't want anyone to see." Ryan paused. "I have a feeling we might not have to go to court at all. The bank won't want this kind of publicity. When I tell them what I have, they'll probably settle out of court." "You might be right," Consuela agreed. "You can see him entering the keystrokes, and Kerry knows his password too." "Sure do," Ryan replied. Consuela snorted. "The idiot. I had a security level that only allowed small tasks. His level lets him handle all the accounts. Only a fool lets someone else know their password, even if the other person is honest." "Yeah, that's true," Ryan agreed. "Good thing Kerry hasn't used what she knows." "Yeah, I guess she could ruin him if she did," Consuela said. "Actually, so could I," Ryan said thoughtfully. "I watched him type it enough times." "Good thing you're honest," Consuela remarked with a grin. Ryan shook his head. "Don't count on that too much. I don't like him or her one bit." They both laughed. "Do you like Louis L'Amour?" she asked, noticing the book he brought. "Oh yeah," Ryan said. "He and Tom Clancy are my favorite writers. Both are natural storytellers." "I like Tom Clancy. What's Louis L'Amour about?" They talked for another hour, tipping the waitress well for her patience. On her way home, Consuela thought about her conversations with Ryan. It was enjoyable to be with a good-looking man again after so long. It had taken years to get over her divorce, and she hadn't trusted men for a long time. But she trusted Ryan. He listened, was strong yet gentle with Belinda, and spoke well. He didn't rush to correct her and was easy to be with. She sat in her car for a moment after pulling into the driveway, a habit from her time in Albuquerque, where gangs made it necessary to check for danger before getting out. There was no one in the shadows here, though, just hard-working or retired folks. Sometimes she thought the neighborhood was a metaphor for her life. Nearing 30, she felt time passing her by like the aging houses on her block. But she shook off the mood and went next door to pick up Belinda from Mrs. Alvarez. Later, as she got Belinda ready for bed, a plan formed in her mind. She wondered what Ryan would think of her idea. His opinion mattered more to her than she had realized. "You want to look at the DVDs?" Ryan asked, surprised. It was Friday night, a night for partying, but that wasn't Consuela's style, and Belinda was just a few steps away in her bedroom. Belinda had clung to Ryan all evening, not wanting to go to bed. It was the first time Ryan had been invited over, and Belinda had made a deep impression on him. Those aren't for casual viewing, you know. It's a lot of sex and talking about sex and them disrespecting everyone. They're just not— I know, Consuela exclaimed, trying to keep from blushing. Ryan studied her briefly, then grinned. "On second thought, none of the videos are really good. Most of them are pretty boring, actually. If you want to watch them, I guess it's okay with me." Ryan was teasing. He didn't think she really wanted to watch the sex. There was another reason he hadn't figured out yet. He watched as the red spread from her neck to her ears. No, she protested. She searched for the words she needed. She tried again. "Look, Ryan, remember we talked about the book you had with you last night, right?" Ryan pursed his lips. He still didn't see where this was going. "Yeah." Consuela wet her lips with the tip of her tongue. The sight caught Ryan's attention and nearly distracted him from what she said next. "You said you understood why that farm boy tried to kill his wife's lover, right?" And you told me you don't know how you didn't kill your wife's first lover. Didn't you tell me that just last night? And you had to quit carrying your gun because you were afraid of what you'd do to Shawn Michaels if you ran into him or something? Ryan nodded. Their conversations had covered a lot last night. He had told Consuela many things he'd never told anyone else. Consuela got up to pace. Her house was small. There were only 3 steps from the couch to the TV. Her pacing was quick and nervous. "There is a way to make this guy a lot more miserable than just losing his job," she said. Ryan grinned in astonishment when she used the word cabron with considerable fierceness. It was an indication of how furious she was at the man. He took a moment to consider his options while she continued to walk up and down the living room. Consuela was focused on getting some retribution from Shawn Michaels. She was furious about Michaels' request 6 months ago that she meet him for sex in an apartment he maintained near the downtown bank. He hadn't accepted no for an answer and had badgered her for weeks before trying to get her fired. Ryan, on the other hand, was more furious at his wife's betrayal than at the man she'd done it with. That was not to say there wasn't enough rage left over for Michaels, though. Carrie had not bothered to take off her wedding band to screw Michaels. It had been clearly visible in all of the videotapes Ryan had of the pair of adulterous lovers. Even if he didn't know Ryan, and they had met on several occasions, Shawn Michaels knew he was having sex with another man's wife. In another era, like in the days of Ryan's great-grandfather, Ryan would have been justified in hunting Michaels down and shooting him. The scenario in the Louis L'Amour book he'd read came to mind. Ryan had always considered himself a throwback to an earlier time. He could do with a little payback directed against the man who had dishonored him. He grinned fiercely. "What did you have in mind?" he asked. "So what do you think?" Consuela asked nervously. She sat perched on the edge of the sofa cushion. Consuela looked at Ryan uneasily. She didn't know how he would feel about her idea. It was, after all, dangerous and highly illegal. It was Ryan's turn to pace up and down for a long while. He was a reasonably honest man. He wasn't a fanatic about it, though. If nothing else, his dealings with the local union when his little company had grown taught him there was a bit of greed in everyone. The payments to the non-existent security firm he'd been making to avoid labor problems were illegitimate. He didn't want the union in his shop, and they were willing to look the other way for a consideration. He didn't know if it was against the law to pay the extortion, but it was certainly unlawful for the union rep to ask for it. Ryan had cooperated to the extent that he never complained to the authorities. This was way beyond that minor involvement with something illegal. Could he live with this? "It's risky," he said finally. "Awfully risky." He sat on the opposite side of the sofa and leaned his head back, closing his eyes to think. "But not too risky. If we're smart," he said at length. "And if we don't get too greedy," he added. He thought a moment longer. "How would we set up accounts to send wire transfers to?" he asked. Consuela gulped and didn't answer for a moment. The comment and the follow-up question indicated Ryan had more than half accepted the premise of punishing the bank, Shawn Michaels, and Carrie Gilchrist all at one time. "My mother's uncle Roberto lives in Mexico City," she said unsteadily. "He has an import and export company and travels all over the Caribbean on business. He knows lots of people. Some of them have contacts." Her voice trailed off. Neither commented on the implication. Her great-uncle knew people in both high and low places, people he could call on, who knew how to keep their mouths shut for a price. "We know the passwords," he mused, "but no one knows we do. No one would expect us to know." He thought for a moment. "Well, unless my video is shown somewhere," he remarked. He opened his eyes and looked at Consuela. "This had better be worth me losing my revenge on my wife," he told her quietly. "Why?" she asked, confused by the comment. "You can still show the times when she was having sex with that man. It's just the kitchen you couldn't show anyone." She stopped. Ryan was shaking his head. "Nope. We can't afford the possibility. Someone might wonder if I had spy cameras in one place. Why wouldn't I have cameras somewhere else? See?" She nodded. It made too much sense to argue. Ryan closed his eyes again and tilted his head to rest on the back of the sofa. "I paid cash for the cameras and everything else," Ryan said thoughtfully. "That's all the guy would accept. He was liquidating his inventory and needed cash quickly. There are no credit card receipts with my name on them." Heck, it was in Dallas over a year ago. There's no paper trail. I got a cash receipt, but I know where it is and can burn it. The guy probably has a record of the purchase, but it's not linked to my name. He didn't ask for it, and I didn't give it. He couldn't identify me now. If the cops find him, there's no problem. We can destroy the VHS tapes, DVDs, tape recordings, cameras, tape decks, everything. All the equipment is in my garage, and all the evidence is with me in my pickup. Ryan was talking to the ceiling, thinking out loud. We can get rid of everything. After wiping my prints off, of course. I didn't drill any holes to mount the cameras. They were just hidden in places Carrie wouldn't look. Susie Homemaker, she is not. What else am I missing? Anything? They talked for hours, planning how to dispose of all the gear and evidence Ryan had gathered on his wife. It was hard letting that go, but they couldn't risk anyone finding out he had done some personal investigating. If that was known, there might be questions about what he'd seen. Consuelo wondered how she would get access to Michael's laptop, but Ryan had a plan. When Michaels and Carrie came in for their trysts, the laptop was always left on the sofa while they rushed upstairs. It stayed there until one of them came back down. Ryan also knew how he and Consuela could get into the house without being detected. There was undeveloped land behind the house, choked with scrub oak, cedar, and underbrush. He had explored it when they first moved in and knew a way to their backyard from the other side. The chain-link fence around the backyard could be easily jumped. The patio door rolled open and shut silently. Ryan could leave it unlocked when he went to work. He was willing to bet Carrie wouldn't check it when she came home with her lover. The patio door opened into the dining room, which was a few steps from the kitchen where the phone jack was. The sofa with the laptop was just beyond the dining room. Getting in and out would be simple. They didn't know how long Consuela would have on the laptop, so they made a note to use a stopwatch to time the breaks between Michael's and Carrie's sessions. They realized they could do this multiple times over a short period, maybe a week, to drain enough funds from the bank to make it hurt. Ryan was sure Carrie would invite her lover over if she thought he was out of town. She had probably been with Sean every day that week while he was gone. He'd know more when he reviewed the tapes he left recording. They broke for the night, agreeing to never make notes on paper or a computer once they started this operation. Any necessary notes would be strictly controlled, burned, and the ashes disposed of safely. They would never make traceable phone calls or speak to anyone else about this. Most importantly, they couldn't be seen together in public until it was over. This last agreement hurt the most. They had grown comfortable with each other in just 5 days. It was painful to realize they couldn't afford to attract attention by being seen together. Ryan went back to his motel, and Consuela went to bed after checking on Belinda. The little girl would be sad when she woke and saw Ryan wasn't there. When he got home Saturday afternoon, Ryan found more proof of Carrie's infidelity. He needed to time the gaps between her and Sean's sessions to know how much time he and Consuela would have. His review of the tapes showed they'd have a little more than 25 minutes each time for Consuela to work her magic. The sexual encounters between Carrie and Sean never lasted less than 30 minutes, with only one instance being that short. Ryan figured that if he and Consuela were in the house for just 25 minutes, there was no way they'd get caught. He took a 5-minute margin into account. He dumped all the tapes into a cardboard box, along with most of the cameras, recorders, and audio tapes. The box went into the passenger side floorboard of his pickup. Carrie hadn't been near the truck in over a year, making it a safe hiding place for anything. On Sunday afternoon, Ryan drove to Austin and bought half a dozen prepaid cell phones. He and Consuela would use them to contact each other while avoiding public contact. The phones were untraceable, and he paid cash for them at 6 different convenience stores to ensure there was no paper trail. Before going into the stores, he checked for security cameras. He was polite and kept a neutral expression everywhere he went. No one would remember the man in nondescript clothing. Meanwhile, Carrie ignored him the entire weekend, which suited Ryan just fine. He had no intention of spending time with her, and the thought of making love to her made him physically ill. She slept most of the weekend, and Ryan left her alone to recuperate. He was beginning to relish the idea of what he and Consuela were planning for Carrie and Shawn Michaels on Monday night. Consuela made a call from her aunt's house to her great-uncle Roberto, asking her aunt to leave the room for a short time. Her aunt, who had a bit of larceny in her soul, would have loved to know what Consuela was planning but understood when she wasn't told. Roberto wouldn't normally accept calls from unknown numbers, but he was ready to answer when any of 6 numbers showed up on his caller ID. After speaking to him, Consuela ended the call with some domestic chat she would normally have with him. Ryan had made a trip to her house in the late afternoon, driving a car loaned to him by one of his workmen, who needed the big pickup to get building supplies on Tuesday. Ryan made a mental note for him and Consuela to use rentals for their trips to and from his house, figuring out how to do it without leaving a credit card trail. Belinda was delighted when her mother left her with Ryan while she went to her aunt's. Ryan enjoyed it too. When Consuela returned, she found her daughter cuddled in Ryan's arms as they both dozed in the big easy chair. She watched them for a long time before waking them, taking that time to let her tears dry. Consuela spent every free moment the next week, which weren't many, speaking with her great-uncle. Roberto called in favors with contacts in Belize, the Cayman Islands, Barbados, Bermuda, Antigua, Curacao, Aruba, Jamaica, and other places Consuela had never heard of. The accounts were ready for use in offshore banks known for tight security. Most of the accounts had been idle, waiting for activation, and a few were brand new by the time the preliminaries were done. Roberto set up a money path through banks in London, Switzerland, Nigeria, and back to the Caribbean. He set up several hundred separate accounts, knowing whatever his great-niece was planning had a short lifespan. There would be no time for the funds to accumulate or for typical investment transactions. A week and a half after Roberto finished, a smiling young Hispanic boy delivered a rewritable CD to Consuela. She looked up to find the boy had left without a word. The CD contained a spreadsheet that she and Ryan loaded onto a second-hand laptop Ryan had bought for cash. It was the only record they kept. The CD was sanded smooth, broken into small pieces, melted, and dumped into the San Antonio River. They expected to let the money sit in accounts for a couple of years to allow investigations to die down. This was no burden. They planned to file civil lawsuits against the bank, expecting to win and hurt the bank for not enforcing their own contracts and morals clauses. Pilfering the accounts of wealthy customers would make it look like Shawn Michaels and Carrie Gilchrist had conspired in bank fraud. The jail terms they might get were better than being shot like they would have been 100 years ago in this same city. Ryan and Consuela reasoned that the money taken from the rich bank account holders would be replaced by the bank. The bank couldn't afford to lose their business if all the wealthy customers threatened to withdraw their funds. These clients could be relied upon to make that threat, and the loss to the bank would be an additional penalty. The bank would have to absorb this loss and ensure that in the future, one of their senior supervisors didn't harass a single mother or help himself to another man's wife on company time. Consuela's older second cousin, Richard, would store the laptop for them when she and Ryan finished the active phase of their plan. Richard wasn't computer literate and would have no interest in the laptop. He was also a recluse with few friends, living in a remote cabin. His home was so far out in the sticks that even the ranch's cowboys never ventured there. He had built it with the owner's permission as compensation for a favor Richard had done 20 years earlier. No one knew what that favor had been. What mattered to Ryan and Consuela was that Richard's home was extraordinarily remote, and no one could approach it without Richard seeing them coming from a long way off. Consuela was sure the laptop would be safe with him, and she easily convinced Ryan. A month and a half after Ryan and Consuela first met, all the groundwork was laid. The accounts were ready, and the first pair of untraceable cell phones they used to communicate had been smashed into pieces and scattered in a half-dozen San Antonio dumpsters. All the gear Ryan had purchased from the spy shop and the recordings made with it had been destroyed, burned, and the remnants deposited in a city dump 100 miles away. All their written notes had been burned and the ashes dumped in the San Antonio River south of town. The storage bin in the garage where Ryan had kept the books had been emptied and the contents carefully disposed of. He didn't want that area in the garage to stand out, so he cleaned the whole thing thoroughly. Their plan called for Ryan to stay home for a week or two to interfere with the lovers' trysts. He took time off from work, telling Carrie he needed to recharge after several months of hard work. She couldn't object. There was no good reason to push him out of the house. Ryan was exceptionally attentive all week, showing up at the bank to take her to lunch or just dropping by in the middle of the afternoon. On Friday evening, he and Carrie attended a dinner hosted by one of the bank vice presidents at a posh hotel on the Riverwalk. It was an excuse for a formal evening out in the early fall. Ryan hadn't attended the previous year because he didn't like many of the people Carrie worked with, but he surprised her this year with his enthusiasm. She tried to dissuade him, but Ryan wouldn't hear of it. He surprised her again with a beautifully tailored tuxedo he bought just for the event, along with the best accessories. He also got a haircut and took extra care with his shave. At the dance, Ryan stayed close to Carrie, though she tried to divert him to other groups of partygoers. He smiled inwardly when she reintroduced Shawn Michaels to him. Ryan already knew who he was from previous meetings, but it was interesting to look down into the man's eyes and squeeze his pale hand when Carrie introduced them. The slightly widened pupils and the distinct expression of pain when Ryan's grip tightened were well worth the price of the tuxedo. Ryan hadn't realized until now that his 6'1" frame was so much taller than Michael's. Michael's didn't like it, and Carrie didn't seem to appreciate the clear distinction between the two men either. Ryan wandered away from Carrie's side not long after that, but he wasn't alone for long. A number of women, unattached and otherwise, noticed the tension when Ryan shook Michael's hand and wanted a closer look at the winner of the contest. He noticed irritation on Carrie's face when she saw him across the room with 3 women vying for his attention. Carrie grew visibly more concerned when Ryan reintroduced himself to Sharon, Shawn's wife. He had met her earlier in the year at a function but hadn't seen her since. The attractive blonde spent half an hour chatting casually with Ryan. Near the end of their conversation, Sharon was distracted by something behind Ryan. He turned to see Carrie standing close to Shawn, smiling up at him. They were part of a crowd, and there was nothing overtly suspicious about their postures or attitudes, but Sharon was watching closely. When he turned back to Sharon, a ghost of a frown was just fading from her face. There was a sadness in her eyes she couldn't hide. Ryan didn't know what to do. He didn't know Sharon well enough to share what he knew about her husband, and this wasn't the right time or place. His sudden interest in being with Carrie was a smokescreen, a setup to trap her and Shawn. It worked so well that by the second week, Carrie and Shawn were too scared to meet up, worried that Ryan would show up unexpectedly. Ryan continued his surprise visits to the bank a couple more times just to keep them on edge. These visits were short, made on his way to other destinations. By the end of the second week, Carrie was clearly frustrated and anxious, and Ryan assumed Shawn was feeling the same way. Ryan and Consuela congratulated themselves on their success. It was easier than Ryan had thought to get into the house on Carrie and Shawn's first date. On Ryan's first Monday back at work, he orchestrated the exact time the lovers would leave work by taking Carrie to an early lunch. He set this up on Sunday, telling Carrie he would pick her up on his way out of town for a business meeting in Austin. She agreed, suggesting a quick lunch at Taco Bell near the bank. Ryan knew she wanted to get the lunch over with quickly and get him out of town. That was fine with him. His only goal was to make sure she and Shawn couldn't leave work in the morning. Ryan and Consuela borrowed cars from Consuela's family instead of renting them. They used Consuela's cousin Alfredo's car that day and would use different ones from other family members throughout the week. Consuela had arranged for these cars to be left in out-of-the-way parking lots with keys under the mats. By 7 a.m., she and Ryan would have full use of the cars, and when they returned them, they would leave a few $100s under the mat. Ryan told his senior foreman he was taking more time off to go to his deer lease near Marble Falls. This wasn't unusual, even though he had already been away for 2 weeks. He always took time off for deer season, so no one questioned it. Consuela called in sick, telling her boss she had the flu or a bad cold and hoped to be back in a day or two. Her boss wished her a speedy recovery. While they waited in a small barbecue restaurant's parking lot, Ryan and Consuela talked about anything that came to mind. They were beginning to enjoy each other's company more and more. Ryan had left a listening device in the foyer of his house to know when Carrie and Shawn arrived. Consuela went into the restaurant and brought back a bag of pulled pork sandwiches, giving them a reason to be parked there. "About time," Ryan commented as he glanced at his watch. The key rattling in the front door lock was clearly audible through the speaker of the portable receiver on the dashboard. The excited voices confirmed it. Carrie and her lover had arrived. Ryan and Consuela quickly got out of the car, careful to make sure no one was watching. They moved into the scrub oak and brush behind the restaurant, which extended to the back of Ryan's home. They had considered dressing in black and wearing masks, but decided against it, knowing it would draw attention. Instead, they wore wigs, plain baseball caps, dark sunglasses, and unremarkable clothing in muted greens, browns, and dark grays. Their footwear was dark and unremarkable, and they bought different sizes of shoes and boots to avoid recognition. Ryan and Consuela were ready. They were about to set their plan in motion, knowing they had just enough time to execute it. Another day, they would wear multiple pairs of thick socks with shoes that were too big. Everything they wore was clean but well used, bought from Salvation Army and Goodwill stores in Austin, Dallas, and Houston. Nothing had been purchased locally. They had 6 sets of clothing and footwear, 1 spare. After each use, they would burn the clothing and scatter any metal bits like zippers and buttons in several regional lakes. It took only 10 minutes, maybe a bit more, to navigate the couple of 100 yards through the brush and trees. They could have done it faster, but Ryan led Consuela on a roundabout route to avoid leaving tracks. It wasn't hard to find stretches of hard soil or bare rock where their shoes wouldn't leave any marks. They would return the same way, sweeping away any tracks with a branch. They planned to use this path only once, leaving nothing to chance. At the edge of the woods, they put on disposable latex gloves and checked each other's appearance to make sure their disguises were intact. Ryan gave Consuela a thumbs up and she returned it with a nervous smile. They hopped the fence and walked to the patio door, keeping their pace natural. Their eyes constantly scanned behind their dark glasses. They saw no one at the windows of the house or the neighboring homes. 3 steps into the yard, tall shrubs on both sides of the Gilchrist house hid them effectively from anyone who might have been at the neighbors' windows. Ryan opened the patio door with ease and slid it open in one smooth movement. As expected, Carrie hadn't thought to secure the house when she came home in the middle of the day. Seconds later, the glass door was closed softly behind them. Ryan and Consuela stood close together, hidden from anyone outside, hardly daring to breathe for a moment. Ryan showed Consuela his watch, indicating they would leave the house at the 26-minute mark no matter what. She nodded, and Ryan started the stopwatch function. They listened for a moment longer. Their hearts raced, adrenaline pumping through their veins. The sounds from upstairs told them the lovers were already at it. The wet smacking of flesh was clear. "Oh God, Sean!" Carrie screamed. "Do that! It's been so long, darling!" Ryan's forehead creased with deep lines. He stood still in the kitchen doorway, the fury he'd felt since discovering Carrie's second infidelity flooding back. He shifted his weight, ready to storm upstairs, but felt Consuela's hand on his forearm. He looked at her, eyebrows raised in question. They had agreed not to speak until they were safely back in the car. Her touch brought a measure of sanity back. Suppressing his rage, Ryan gave her a strained smile and took a shuddering breath. It wasn't easy, but he settled back and listened only for signs that Carrie and Sean were about to come downstairs. He grinned at Consuela and gave her a firm nod. Consuela spotted the laptop on the sofa and walked carefully across the living room to retrieve it. Ryan had taught her how to walk silently, a skill he learned from his grandfather. After some practice, she could cross a creaky hardwood floor without making a sound. Ryan grinned with pride. Consuela took the laptop into the kitchen and sat at the table. In another minute, she was logging into the bank server with Michael's password. They were mildly surprised when it worked. Bank regulations required users to change their passwords every 60 days, but Shawn Michaels thought himself above that. Consuela laid out the printed spreadsheet of account numbers set up by Great-Uncle Roberto beside the laptop. The sheets would be burned tonight along with their clothing. They would rely on the digital version on the laptop Cousin Richard was guarding and the backup Great-Uncle Roberto had. Other printed spreadsheets with different account numbers were hidden in Ryan's pickup for the rest of the week's visits. Consuela went to work locating the accounts of very wealthy people who had entrusted their money to Shawn Michaels and Carrie Gilchrist. Soon, Consuela was typing commands into the system as fast as her fingers could move. Back in the car, they couldn't help but laugh wildly at each other's comments, no matter how weak the humor was. Consuela kept reaching out to touch Ryan's hand and forearm, seeking reassurance from the closeness. After a while, the adrenaline wore off, and they were quiet, but her hand remained in his. It was a comfort for both of them as the enormity of what they had done sank in. By the time they got to where they would exchange cars, holding hands just felt good. They left the barbecue restaurant's parking lot immediately, driving well within the speed limit along a pre-planned route. It had been difficult, but they found a path through the city that avoided places with visible security cameras. With their dull, uninteresting car, wigs, caps, dark sunglasses, and carefully chosen clothing, they didn't think they would catch anyone's eye. They kept their caps pulled down and their faces partially covered, just in case someone recognized them. Back at the lot where Ryan and Consuela's cars were parked, they stripped down to their underwear and put everything they'd used that day into a big trash bag, which went into the back seat of Ryan's pickup. They were mildly embarrassed at their partial nudity before each other, as it was the first time they'd seen each other undressed. Each thought the other was calm and businesslike, not realizing both felt self-conscious. They dressed quickly and departed in different directions. Consuela left to pick up Belinda from daycare, and Ryan headed to the hunting cabin near Marble Falls. That night, he would burn everything in the bag and dispose of the ashes and metal parts in the lake. By Friday, it was a well-settled routine for Ryan and Consuela. It was almost boring, and they had to remind each other to stay vigilant. They parked in different locations each day near the barbecue restaurant, the best place to enter the brush. Their disguises and changes in pace and posture ensured no one noticed the same couple wandering around all week. Shawn Michaels and Carrie Gilchrist found time to meet at the Gilchrist home every day that week. The times varied, but they always met there. Ryan thought it was sad that Shawn Michaels never sprang for a motel room just for a change of scenery. Consuela found it sad that there was nothing better to say about the man. Changing into their disguises on Friday took Ryan and Consuela less than half the time it had on Monday. They parked just down the street from the barbecue restaurant, strolled slowly toward it arm in arm, and walked past without stopping. Ryan let the earpiece from the remote portable receiver slip off his ear and tucked it into his pocket. The two patrol cars parked in the lot were likely there only because the officers were inside eating. There was no sign of an investigation. "Wave off," Ryan said in a low voice a block away from the place. Consuela nodded, understanding the term. She turned back, seemingly to check traffic before they crossed the street. "No one coming?" she murmured. "Still, 'tis the better part of valor," Ryan remarked. "It's an omen," Consuela said decisively. Without appearing to hurry, they walked around the block, got back to the borrowed car, and left. They filled their last black trash bag with the clothing they'd just removed, added the sets they hadn't used, and put the bag in Ryan's pickup. He placed an envelope with $300 under the seat since there was no floor mat, and got out of the area quickly. They shared a quick, much-needed kiss, feeling an urgency that hadn't been there before. They told themselves nothing had changed from the previous days, but the patrol vehicles made them nervous. They were relieved this phase was over. The next day, after returning from his supposedly unsuccessful hunt, Ryan removed the audio pickup near the front door. He crushed it under his heel on the concrete garage floor and carefully picked up all the pieces. Ryan placed the crushed audio pickup into a trash bag, dropping the pieces into dumpsters across the city that night. On Saturday evening, an hour after a call from Consuela, Great-Uncle Roberto began spreading the word. By Monday, men and women with forgettable faces started emptying accounts across Caribbean banks using passwords only the true account owners should know. They took cashier's checks, sometimes cash, and deposited them into other private banks as instructed. These secondary accounts, now flush with cash, were quickly emptied again. By the next afternoon, none had a positive balance. From then on, every transaction was in cash. Eventually, thousands of small amounts, usually in US dollars, found their way to Roberto's special number accounts in private banks. 3 weeks passed without any reports in the news. Ryan expected to hear something quickly, as this would be a significant event for the bank. Consuela totaled everything up, revealing they had moved nearly $9 million offshore. None of the money was near where it had been initially sent. Investigators would find the trail went cold quickly, making it nearly impossible to trace beyond the first or second deposit. The anonymous men and women who moved the money had done their jobs and disappeared into the crowd of various Caribbean cities. The funds moved through a web of transactions, eventually disappearing into the vast pool of wealth in Caribbean banks. With Cayman Islands banks alone holding over $800 billion in assets, the $9 million didn't make a ripple. Each time the money was moved, small amounts were taken out. Even after everyone took their share, there was still more than $7 million left for Ryan and Consuela. The bank took a significant hit, one that would certainly hurt. The funds began to arrive in Mexico City, buried in routine transactions controlled by Roberto. Consuela had kept each transaction under $10,000 to avoid raising red flags. She even set up numerous automatic transfers that occurred after she went offline. The heist had been made possible by one login name and a 12-character password. Ryan and Consuela knew it was only a matter of time before someone noticed the missing money. Ryan and Consuela continued their lives as usual, waiting for the fallout. "Hi," came the tinny voice over the prepaid cell phone. "How are you doing?" Ryan replied, recognizing Consuela's voice despite the cheap phone's distortion. "Good. Real good. How about you?" she answered. "Doing great. Tired of waiting, but good otherwise," Ryan remarked. They were careful not to say anything incriminating over the phone. "Me too," she said. There was a pause and some background noise. "Hello, Mr. Ryan," Belinda's voice came through. Ryan's features softened. "Hello, Belinda. How are you?" "I am good," the little girl replied. "When are you going to come to see me?" "Oh, I think I'll be there on Sunday," Ryan answered. He had a couple of crews heading to the small town on Monday. Several businesses along the main street had negotiated a special price for remodeled storefronts. He'd told his wife he was going out a day early to survey them. Carrie didn't mind. She was glad to be rid of him. Ryan talked to the 4-year-old for a few minutes, enjoying their conversation. He didn't talk down to her, and she loved that. Both looked forward to his visit on Sunday evening. "Are you still there?" Consuela asked when she finally managed to take the cell phone from her daughter's small hands. Ryan chuckled, having heard the exchange. "Belinda wasn't happy about losing the phone," he said. "I think she deserves a trip to Baskin-Robbins for an ice cream cone." "Baskin-Robbins," Consuela said, louder than necessary for Belinda's benefit. "I don't know. Has she been a good enough girl for that?" The fussing in the background quickly stopped. Ryan chuckled again. There was a pause. "I saw an interesting TV show last night," Consuela said casually. "Oh?" Ryan responded. "Yeah, on Channel 16 at 10 o'clock. It's on every weeknight at the same time." "What's it called?" Ryan asked, sensing something in her tone. "It's called Busted. I think it's taped in Dallas or maybe Houston," she said a bit nervously. "Oh, what's it about?" he asked. "I'd rather you watch it and tell me what you think," Consuela replied, clearly not wanting to discuss it over the phone. Ryan agreed to watch the show. They talked for another 10 minutes and then ended the call. Ryan watched the show in his study with the door closed. Carrie had gone to bed early with another headache. She was beginning to feel uneasy about Ryan's lack of interest in sex, but not enough to do anything about it. For now, she relied on Ryan for security and Shawn Michaels for her emotional and sexual needs. The TV program opened with information about a private investigator firm based in Houston. This episode was about a young woman who suspected her boyfriend of cheating. She was right. The show revealed video clips of the boyfriend with another woman. The host then took the girl to confront her boyfriend, who looked like a deer caught in headlights, and took a considerable amount of verbal abuse. The second episode was similar, involving a man who thought his wife was cheating with a man from the gym. The credits mentioned that the investigative service was available to anyone, and if they used the case on the show, it was free. Ryan thought for 10 minutes past the point where he was sure of what he was going to do. Then he picked up the phone to call the number on the screen. Tomorrow morning, he'd call an attorney and tell them he was sure his wife was cheating and what he'd done to expose it. He knew what the TV detectives would find out. The long wait was nearly over. The night was dark, with lightning building up in the northwest. A storm was gathering strength and heading towards the city. It was warm, with unusually mild days and cool nights. People wore light jackets or shirt sleeves, with raincoats or ponchos close at hand. The host motioned to the camera woman, who took a strong stance, ensuring she wouldn't faint from decreased blood circulation. Once everyone was set, the host took Ryan by the elbow and tugged him close so they would both be in frame. The host began to speak, apologizing for asking Ryan to come back early from his business trip. He said they had information on the case Ryan had brought to them and confirmed that his wife was indeed straying from her marriage vows. Ryan, visibly dejected, thought he did a good job of showing his disappointment. To make sure, he turned and walked away from the host and the camera for a moment. There was only his broad back to watch for a moment. Not wanting to overdo it, Ryan cleared his throat and returned to the host. He nodded slowly when asked if he wanted to see the videotaped evidence. The tiny cameras the show's detectives had helped him install in his bedroom were of exceptionally high quality. The scenes of his wife with her lover were sharp and clear, much better than the videos he'd made with his own spy cameras. Ryan showed distress as he watched the view screen. He tugged on his beard, which he had grown along with a mustache to change his appearance. He also wore a Texas Rangers baseball cap, so the spy shop owner in Dallas wouldn't recognize him. The beard and mustache also helped disguise him from people in the small town 50 miles outside San Antonio. He and Consuela hadn't been seen together in public for a couple of months, but it didn't hurt to be extra careful. The host already knew Ryan was willing to see the video. The producer who called Ryan in Memphis 2 days ago had apologized, but asked if he could meet them Friday evening when they could get a full film crew down to San Antonio. Ryan agreed, as the conference in Memphis wasn't critical. He had gone out of town to give Carrie a sense of freedom. When asked about confronting his wayward wife, Ryan had a sudden inspiration. He signaled frantically at the camera and the producer. Wait, I have an idea," he said. The annoyance on the host and producer's faces faded as Ryan explained his plan. They knew he'd recognized Shawn Michaels in the videos. What they didn't know was that Ryan was well enough acquainted with Shawn's wife to call her. They smiled broadly at his suggestion to invite her along for the confrontation. Someone handed Ryan a cell phone with the top already flipped open. "Mrs. Michaels?" Ryan asked. "Yes," came the uncertain reply. "Sharon, this is Ryan Gilchrist," he said somberly. "Oh, hello, Ryan," she replied immediately, though her voice didn't sound happy. Ryan decided to get straight to the point. "Sharon, I'm really sorry to tell you this, but your husband and my wife have been having an affair." There was a sharp intake of breath, but Sharon didn't respond immediately. "Sharon?" Ryan prompted. "Yes, I'm here," she said, her voice sounding resigned. "How long have you known?" "I've suspected for months, but I saw proof tonight," Ryan answered, ready for this question. "I see," Sharon said with a deep sigh. "Well, I can't say it's a big surprise, damn him." "Sharon, there's something else," Ryan said, unsure how to continue. "I'm with a film crew from a TV show out of Houston. We're about to surprise them on a date at a restaurant down on the Riverwalk." There was silence on the other end of the line for a moment. "Oh, wow," Sharon breathed, then giggled like a schoolgirl. "You're going to do a number on my dumb husband, aren't you?" She laughed heartily. "Serves him right, the jerk." "Sharon, I don't know if I should say it this way, but I'm going to destroy him and my wife tonight," Ryan told her. "I can't imagine he'll be able to keep his job, and I'm sorry for what that will do to you." There was another short silence. "Nah, don't worry about it," Sharon replied. "He's got a big golden parachute in his contract. He'll get a nice settlement even if they fire him tomorrow. I'll have all of that and my pound of flesh too before I'm through with him," she added. "I don't blame you a bit," Ryan said, grinning broadly. "But listen, Sharon, do you want to come with us and drop a double bombshell on these two jerks?" Sharon was quiet for a moment longer. "I hadn't thought about that. I'm not sure I want my face plastered all over. You know what? I think that's exactly what I need to get some closure. Yeah, I'll go with you. Where are you?" Ryan handed the phone to the producer to set things up. It didn't take long. When she arrived, she would sign an agreement to use her voice and image on the TV show. They'd outfit her with a battery-powered lapel mic, just like the one Ryan had clipped on his shirt collar. The power pack was hooked on his belt in the small of his back. There were 4 big cameras, each with a crew of 3 in addition to the camera operator. There had to be someone to guide the cameraman or woman, either by tugging on their clothing or guiding them with a hand around the waist. This made it unnecessary for the camera operator to take their eyes off the viewfinder. The third person carried a big boom mic, which could be thrust close overhead to capture everything being said. A group of guys and 2 women, identified as licensed private investigators by the producer, accompanied the cameras and host. There were almost as many of them as there were people recording the event. The host kept referring to them as security and detectives. The producer had gone into the rowdy nightclub beforehand and informed the manager about the situation. The manager, familiar with the show and excited about the attention it would bring to the club, had no problem with it. Excited people ordered lots of drinks, which was good for business. She informed the bouncers about the plan and arranged for the camera crews to enter through a side door. She even turned off the automatic alarm for that door to allow quicker access to the table near the dance floor. The host and Ryan walked swiftly from the door into the club's interior. The camera operators and their handlers were right on Ryan's heels, almost pushing him ahead in their eagerness to capture the action. As the club patrons recognized them, a raucous roar went up, but the couple sitting at the side table didn't notice. Carrie had her back to the approaching group, while Shawn Michaels was twisted around in his seat, talking to a waitress. Neither noticed anything unusual until the primary camera crew turned on the big floodlight. Carrie jumped in her seat and swiveled around, momentarily blinded by the light. "Hello, Carrie, what's up?" Ryan said loudly, trying to keep the malice out of his voice. It wasn't easy. This moment had been a long time coming. Carrie's jaw dropped, her eyes wide with shock. She was caught off guard, startled worse than when Ryan had walked in on her and Marshall years earlier. "Carrie, I'm Johnny Waterfield from the TV show Busted," the host told her. She looked at him, disbelieving and barely comprehending his words. "What?" she said faintly. The boom mic picked it up clearly. "Would you like to explain to Ryan what you're doing here with this man?" Johnny asked. "We're just friends," she choked out. "No, that's not true, and you know it," Johnny retorted. "We have videotape of you and Mr. Michaels having sex in your own home on several occasions. Do you have anything to say to that?" She shook her head, her eyes growing wild. She was a trapped animal, desperate to escape but hemmed in by club customers and the camera crews. She could only stare in horror into the camera lens. "We're just friends," she protested again. "We're just having a few drinks." "Is that right?" Ryan demanded loudly. "Just friends? How about talking to another one of your friends?" He pointed beyond her shoulder. "Say hello to Sharon," he snarled. Ryan had worried about not being able to react naturally, but his anger was genuine now. Sharon Michaels had quietly slipped behind the table and borrowed a full pitcher of beer from an adjoining table. When the camera shifted to center her in the frame, she dumped the beer on her husband. Enough of the cold liquid splashed on Carrie's gauzy white top to make it nearly transparent. While the view would be blurred in the final cut, those present could clearly see she was braless. Ryan took in her micro miniskirt and high stiletto heels and shook his head. A second camera crew caught his disgusted expression perfectly. "Have you even got panties on?" Ryan sneered. Without waiting for an answer, he lifted his wife's skirt to find she did not. The crowd, those close enough to see, gasped. Carrie quickly yanked the skirt back into place and tucked her legs under the table. Shawn Michaels was still wiping beer from his eyes, his face pale, his eyes wide. He hadn't uttered a word, but his wife Sharon was haranguing him viciously. "What do you have to say for yourself?" she demanded. "Speak up, you son of a bitch. What are you doing here with this cheap hooker?" The crowd loved it, and the noise level rose again. The producer had a beatific expression on his face. This would be the best episode he had put together in a year and a half. Sharon grabbed her husband's earlobe and yanked him out of his seat, dragging him toward the exit. This started a general exodus. Carrie lurched to her feet and tried to push her way out of the club, in shock and unsteady on her 5-inch heels. The club's customers weren't cooperating, making her escape even harder. They tried to hold her back as she hurried out, with some men taking advantage of the situation. She didn't notice outside. The camera crew followed her closely as she rushed down the sidewalk. Realizing she was going the wrong way, she turned back to the parking lot where her car was parked. Passing the club again, the people outside were even more amused. The rain made her clothes cling to her body, her mascara was smudging, and her hair was stuck to her head. She ducked into an alley and found a doorway to shelter in for a moment. "I can't believe this," she said. The host and the main camera crew were still with her. "What, Carrie?" Johnny asked curiously. "Do you want to explain why you've been seeing another man behind your husband's back? I'm sure he'd like to know." "I can't believe he'd humiliate me like this," Carrie cried. Johnny looked shocked for a moment. "Don't you think you're the one who's been humiliating him, Carrie?" he finally asked. Carrie didn't answer. She might not have heard him. She struggled past the host and continued down the alley. When she reached her car, her shaking fingers couldn't get the keys out of her small bag or fit them into the lock. Johnny took the keys and opened the door for her. She had to try several times to get them from him before he finally let go. She wouldn't answer any of his questions, just kept shaking her head. Ryan knocked on the window hard. "Hey, sweetie," he said mockingly. "What's your hurry? The party's not over yet. Look what I have for you." Ryan's lawyer had been ready since the morning after Ryan called the TV show's producers, but the paperwork waited for the right moment. When Ryan heard from the producer 2 days ago, he called the attorney to set things in motion. The divorce papers Ryan had already signed were taken to the courthouse and filed. Now, it was time for the next step. Ryan stepped back to let an older man in a Western suit and a fancy cream-colored Stetson approach the car. The short, slender man showed Carrie his process server's badge and ID. He was another private investigator Ryan had hired, but the badge looked official. She stared in confusion for a moment, then rolled down the window at his gesture. "Carrie Denise Gilchrist?" he asked formally. She nodded. He pulled a stack of papers from his pocket and handed them to her. "You've been served," he said, and walked away, opening an umbrella and heading back to his car. One of the cameras caught his slow walk, but it didn't make the final cut of the show. Carrie still held the documents, looking stunned. Her face showed no emotion. "Carrie!" Ryan said sharply. She turned to look at him. "Don't bother going home," he growled. "The locks were changed 20 minutes after you left for your date. Movers packed your things, and the boxes will be delivered to your parents' place soon. I don't care where you go, Carrie. I loved you, but that love is dead. You killed it. Don't call me. Don't write me. Don't try to contact me in any way." He continued harshly. "I don't want to see you or hear from you. You're trash. I should have kicked you out the first time you cheated. Just looking at you makes me sick." He seemed like he might actually vomit, struggling to find more words but failing. He turned and walked away, leaving his soon-to-be ex-wife frozen in her seat. The camera crew hurried to follow. Meanwhile, Sean and his wife had left unnoticed. She had called a cab for him before entering the club and taken him home. Neighbors heard Sharon scolding him late into the night. When the producers checked on their relationship a week later, she pressured Sean into signing a release for the show to use his image. The producers suspected he didn't know what he was signing. He had only one option: to do exactly what Sharon wanted. Ryan went home and shaved off his mustache and beard. They had served their purpose. The morning after the show was taped, another attorney Ryan hired went to the bank and sat in one of the comfortable chairs in the senior officer's office. When John Harrison, the bank president, walked in, he asked why Carlton J. London was there with his law assistants. Harrison knew who London was. They were both part of the same art groups and charities in San Antonio. London was also one of the best civil law attorneys in the state. Slim and sharp, he was as tough as leather in the courtroom or on his ranch west of Abilene. Mr. Harrison flinched and turned pale when he heard that London was representing Ryan Gilchrist, husband of Carrie, a senior manager in Shawn Michaels' section. Mr. Gilchrist had filed a lawsuit against the bank for failing to enforce its own morality clauses. He claimed the bank knew about his wife's affair with a junior vice president, did nothing, and tried to cover it up, despite the morals clauses in their contracts. He was suing for intentional infliction of emotional distress, saying the bank's negligence had irreparably damaged his marriage. With the preliminaries over, Mr. London announced he wanted to see Shawn Michaels' personal records. He found the human resources supervisor and handed him the first in a stack of subpoenas signed that morning by a friendly judge. The bank president called a meeting with his senior managers to assess the situation. 20 minutes in, the HR director was pulled out of the room. He returned a few minutes later, pale and trembling. A junior employee had seen the subpoena on his supervisor's desk, not realizing the legal department hadn't reviewed it yet. The junior employee produced the requested records, and 2 of Mr. London's assistants used the high-speed copier in the junior's office to make duplicates of every document. Another assistant left immediately with the copies, while Mr. London scrutinized the originals in a small conference room. The room was tense. Could the HR director get some security guards to forcibly remove the file from Mr. London's hands, even with a subpoena? And what about the copies that were already out of the building? No one knew what to do. Then the phone in the corner rang. The most junior executive answered. After listening, he told the president Mr. London had let loose a string of four-letter words while reviewing Michael's personnel record and was now asking for records of all sexual harassment complaints at the bank for the past 2 years. 3 levels of management simultaneously felt the urge to vomit. Ryan and Consuela had discussed the TV show as a way of replacing the confrontation Ryan would have had with Carrie in family court using his own video recordings. They quickly realized that an episode of Busted would not only achieve that goal, but also likely spark an audit of Michael's entire management of the personal wealth division. It did. A week after Ryan's attorney filed the suit, Consuela got a late-night call from an excited friend still working at the bank. The building had gone into virtual lockdown before lunch. The big bosses had been in a panicked meeting all day. Since noon, an army of men and women in expensive suits had arrived and disappeared into the express elevators to the top floor. At closing time, a second, smaller group in cheaper suits came in. 2 of them showed FBI credentials to the guard, and others had different-looking badges. No one looked happy. Rumor had it that the senior vice president in charge of investments had to be restrained when he tried to open a window on the 22nd floor. Consuela thanked her friend and hung up, then used a disposable cell phone to call Ryan with the news. They discussed destroying the prepaid phones, but decided not to until they had any indication they were suspected of being in contact. They couldn't bear to lose their way of communicating. The sound of each other's voice was becoming increasingly important to them. They decided to limit their use of the cell phones as a precaution. "Mr. Gilchrist?" "Yes," Ryan answered absently, focused on the quarterly inventory he was studying. He didn't notice the 2 men who had wandered into his office. "Special Agent Thomas? Special Agent Williams, FBI. May we speak with you?" the taller agent asked. "You're in now." "Might as well," Ryan replied, glancing up to show an irritated scowl. He was truly annoyed with the agents, but not for the reason they suspected. Instead of being unhappy they were there, he was upset they hadn't come by several weeks earlier. Waiting had never been his strong suit. He motioned with his free hand. The agents shoved their badges closer so he could see them. "Nah, I don't want to see your badges," Ryan growled. "I can buy ones that look just like that at Walmart. Show me your ID cards, guys." The agents looked at each other, surprised. Few people asked for their IDs, but they had to show them if asked. They did. Ryan examined them, then picked up the phone and called the local FBI office. He talked to the special agent in charge of the San Antonio office, who confirmed the agents' identities. "Okay," Ryan said. "You're real. What do you need?" His tone softened. "Have you doubted a federal officer before?" asked the older agent. Ryan nodded. "About 2 years ago, some guy came around asking questions about anti-racketeering. He flashed a badge, and my workers were confused. Turned out he was a union organizer trying to scare me into going union. He's still in federal prison. I had to testify at his trial." The agents exchanged looks, which annoyed Ryan. He wondered if they noticed their habit. Both agents recalled a note in Gilchrist's file about his cooperation in a past sting operation. "Who's racketeering now?" Ryan asked. "No one," said Special Agent Thomas. "We're from a joint task force investigating money laundering at the bank where your wife used to work." Ryan snorted. "Have you done your homework? Don't look at each other, just answer." The agents exchanged another quick look, then faced Ryan. They blushed slightly. "If you've looked into me," Ryan said, "you know I won't have a wife when the judge lifts the continuance her lawyer asked for." "We know," Thomas replied. "We also know the divorce is on hold pending the criminal investigation. We think you might have information that could help. Is there anything you'd like to tell us?" Thomas gave Ryan a stern look, hoping to scare him into confessing. Ryan frowned, unimpressed. "Gents, I know how to spell bank, and on a good day I can write money and laundry. But I don't know how I can help you. I haven't heard anything from the bank since my wife and I split up." Ryan sighed as the agents exchanged another look before speaking. He wasn't impressed with their first visit about the bank fraud. They accepted hot, bitter coffee from the corner urn and questioned Ryan for another 15 minutes, learning nothing of interest. They tried different angles, but Ryan showed no signs of having useful information. "What do you think?" Thomas asked his partner as they drove away. "I didn't get anything," Williams replied. "Me neither," Thomas said. "The guy's a bit of a rube. I don't think he's smart enough to be involved in this." "Nope," Williams shot back. "Gilchrist is smart. Watch his eyes next time we talk to him. He's sharp, but likes being underestimated. It gives him an edge. But I doubt he's involved. He only has a BBA and a few night courses in banking. He doesn't have a passport, doesn't know anyone in the Caymans, no unexplained money or debts. If he's part of this, he's very good." That night, Ryan told Consuela about the visit on his prepaid cell phone. She worried about what the agents knew, but Ryan dismissed her fears. "They were just fishing," he said. "If they had anything, they'd have asked specific questions about my work, where I was when the funds went missing, who I talked to on those days. I waited for any hint of suspicion about my connection with you, but there was none. They asked nothing that could lead to you. It was clear the visit meant nothing. They were just going through the motions of the investigation, so the defense couldn't claim they rushed to judgment. Ryan and Consuela only needed to worry if the agents came back with search warrants to search his office. But even if they did, there was nothing to find. The only incriminating evidence, the laptop, was 100 miles away under Cousin Richard's care. Everything else was smashed, burned, and the remains dumped in lakes all around. If they found out about Consuela, it would just look like an affair, given the state of Ryan's marriage. People at the cafe might say Ryan had breakfast with her a couple of times, but that's it. None of her relatives would talk, and few knew anything anyway. The cars were arranged through her aunt, who wouldn't consider cooperating with the police. She was still upset over her son's DUI arrest 7 years ago. Ryan assured Consuela that no suspicion would come her way. The bank's negotiators asked Ryan and his attorney for a meeting to discuss an early settlement of Ryan's suit. Ryan had no problem meeting with them. He was relaxed as he strolled into the bank's conference room. "Mr. Gilchrist, my clients feel your claim of intentional infliction of emotional distress does not have any merit. But we agree there may have been some minor irregularities in the supervision of some employees, and Mr. Gilchrist, is something wrong?" Estrada, the bank's attorney, asked as Ryan stood up, straightening his suit coat. "You said the lawsuit doesn't have any merit, right? If that's the case, I figured we're done here. I was just going to go home and wait for the judge to set a court date," Ryan said. "Perhaps you'd like a moment to confer with your counsel?" Estrada asked nervously. Ryan looked at his attorney, Mr. London, who had also stood up. "Nah, I know Mr. London pretty well now. He's been working for me since late last year. Good man. He's given me all kinds of good advice," Ryan said. "Yes, I'm sure," Estrada replied. "Well, I'll get right to the point. Would you care to have a seat, Mr. Gilchrist?" Ryan shrugged. "If you're done wasting everyone's time, sure. I'm sure we can conclude our business shortly," Estrada said jovially. "Good. I'm scheduled to testify in a sexual harassment case up in Dallas this afternoon. If we can wrap things up here quickly, I'd appreciate it." "I've taken an interest in that case," Ryan said, his exaggerated southern accent making Estrada flush. Estrada's lips tightened, and a nervous tic started on the side of his neck. He knew the case Ryan was referring to. A man in the corner shifted in his seat, causing Estrada to react. "Yes, I'm sure we can get you out of here in plenty of time, Mr. Gilchrist," he said, shuffling through his documents. "Let's get to the bottom line. My clients would like to offer you—" Ryan cut him off with a chopping gesture. "Come off it. Look, this bank is being squeezed between the U.S. Attorney and the Texas Attorney General over sexual harassment by senior officials. It's grown to epidemic proportions in the last 3 years, and now it's all coming home to roost. On top of that, you've got federal agents crawling all over your offices trying to find $1 zillion one of your senior officials sent to secret overseas banks. Your investment and personal wealth divisions aren't separated like they should be, and now you've got auditors everywhere. And I come along wanting a piece of the action because I can trace my marriage failure directly to your senior officers and one of your vice presidents." Ryan leaned back and looked coldly at Estrada's pale face. "I can read, Mr. Estrada. Nearly everything I mentioned is in the newspaper. The rest is in the public records or my own suit. Why are you so surprised I know all this? Did I miss anything?" Estrada, looking defeated, replied, "I think you've summarized the issues quite well, Mr. Gilchrist." The man in the corner groaned and sat up straighter. He stepped into the light. "I'm Parker Winston," he said. "I'm from Chicago." Ryan knew that meant he was from corporate headquarters. Ryan looked at the attorney from the big office with interest. "Estrada," Winston said coldly. "You just told Mr. Gilchrist and Mr. London we have so many problems we don't know where to start fixing them." Estrada looked shocked. "Get out!" Winston ordered harshly. The attorney and his assistant didn't move at first, then quickly gathered their papers and left the room. Winston looked at Ryan for a long moment. He was a man used to power and expected Ryan to look away. When Ryan didn't, Winston spoke in a precise, measured tone. "In 10 minutes, you can walk out of here a rich man," Winston told Ryan. "Get rid of your lawyer, make it just between us, and we can do this quickly." Ryan looked him in the eye. "Mr. London," Ryan said without looking at his attorney, "could you excuse us for a moment?" London nodded, stood up and left the room, leaving his briefcase behind. Winston sat at the head of the conference table, relaxed and confident. "What will it take, Mr. Gilchrist?" he asked suddenly. "I want you and your suit to go away, and we'll pay you well to make that happen. Estrada thinks you're a cowboy, but you're smart enough to know this bank can't handle much more bad publicity. How much?" Ryan thought for a moment. Judging by Estrada's reaction, this man was very powerful. He wanted this case to go away badly. "I don't believe in being too greedy," Ryan said, "but I want this to hurt enough that your bank learns a lesson." Winston's lips thinned. "My price is $4 million, Ryan said quietly. "One lump sum, tax-free. You pay the tax, so I get $4 million after taxes. Unless Congress changes the Small Business Job Protection Act of 1996, so settlements are not taxable again. Have they done that today?" Winston's eyes narrowed. Ryan hadn't stumbled over the name of the act or its acronym. This minor contractor knew a lot. "Done," Winston said. Ryan shook his head and held up his right hand, folding his pinky into his palm. "Don't be so quick to agree, Parker. You might not like the whole package. That was just the first condition. Plus, you pay my lawyer's fees. Any objections so far?" Winston stared at Ryan, trying to read his mind, then shook his head. "Second, the bank settles out of court with all 11 people alleging sexual harassment in Dallas without a trial. Out of the goodness of your heart, you pay them $500,000 each, tax-free, and cover their attorney's fees." Ryan's ring finger wiggled to show the condition wasn't finished. "If they've quit or been fired, offer them their jobs back with suitable promotions and back pay. Those who stayed get back pay for the difference in what they earned and what they should have earned with promotions they missed because of the harassment. Expunge any poor performance reports given during or after the harassment period. Rescind any poor recommendations for those who quit and send new ones with apologies." Ryan folded his ring finger into his palm. "Third, pay Mrs. Sharon Michaels an amount equal to 10 years of her husband's salary and any other compensation he would have earned if he hadn't been indicted for fraud and money laundering. One-time payment, tax-free. Fourth, we get a written apology from the CEO of this bank for the pain caused because you can't keep your house in order. Fifth, in return, we agree not to pursue any future litigation related to these incidents and sign non-disclosure agreements about the settlement and the apology." Ryan's hand formed a fist. He held it still for a moment, then gently placed it on the table. Winston stared at Ryan for a long while, clearly unhappy with the terms. "Come on, Mr. Chicago lawyer, banker man," Ryan said mockingly, his eyes cool and lips curved in an amused smile. "You know damn well. The award to me for the emotional distress claim isn't limited by any current statute," Ryan said. "I've got a really good lawyer working for me. If you don't settle, my award alone could be 20 or 30 million, maybe more. And you know it won't be overturned on appeal. I've looked at the stats on the last 50 similar cases, and they were all upheld, except one with incomplete documentation. You'll also have to pay your own attorney fees on top of that." Winston stayed silent, weighing his options. Ryan had the bank and its officers cornered, and he knew it. Still, Winston hesitated, hoping something might turn the situation around. "What's the bad publicity worth that you'll get every day during my trial and theirs?" Ryan said softly, leaning closer. "I promise you my attorney will hold a press conference on the courthouse steps every single day, right after court adjourns. Can you imagine he'll forget to mention the evil bankers from the north who've come down to corrupt our innocent women and young men in those talks? Winston glared at Ryan, but it had no effect. Agreed, Winston said abruptly, looking resigned. Let's get London back in here. You tell him what he needs to know, and he can draft the paperwork. We'll have to get the individuals who filed harassment lawsuits to agree, but I expect they'll accept the deal quickly. Estrada will call them in Dallas as soon as we're done here. We'll get to them before the first one goes to court. I'll tell Estrada and the people upstairs to sign the agreement with you without delay. All payments will be computed and delivered by courier within 10 workdays of signing. Same for the harassment cases. Agreed? Ryan hesitated, looking intently at Winston for a moment. Then he nodded. Agreed. I'm going to get $500,000? Consuela asked, amazed. Yep, Ryan assured her. She looked at him, bemused. Actually, a bit more for lost wages and other stuff, he added. And you're getting $4 million, huh? Ryan nodded. Pretty cool, he said. Consuela nodded, still dazed. She looked around the small living room of the house she would no longer have to live in. What do we do now? She asked. Well, Ryan said thoughtfully, untangling Belinda's arms from around his neck. She was holding on so tight he had trouble breathing. It had been a long time since Ryan and Consuela felt it was safe to meet, and Belinda was afraid he was going to leave again. How about we go see what dinners are like at the cafe these days? Ryan suggested. Consuela's eyes widened. She knew the significance of being seen in public together. It was no longer dangerous to be together. She smiled happily. Yeah, Belinda, let's go. It took almost longer than the 4-year-old's patience could bear to transfer Belinda's car seat from her mother's sedan to Ryan's big pickup. Eventually, it was installed, and they were on their way. It was a happy ride. The cafe regulars watched their arrival with surprise. This was not a chance meeting at breakfast. And anyway, Ryan and Consuela hadn't had breakfast together there for a long time. When everyone saw how contented and affectionate the three were with each other, even the most doubtful were won over. Smiles were directed at them from all corners of the room. Ryan was accepted without question into their midst. Several couples and families dropped by on their way out to chat with Consuela and to be formally introduced to Ryan. Everyone told them they shouldn't be strangers. They got home just before midnight. Dinner had led to a visit to Baskin-Robbins, and that turned into a trip to the movies to see a children's movie for Belinda. Everyone had a good time and didn't want it to end. Exhausted, Belinda fell asleep in the truck on the way home and only murmured faint protests when Ryan took her out of the car seat and carried her into the house. Consuela loosened the small girl's clothing, took off her shoes, and tucked her into bed while Ryan watched with an affectionate smile. Ryan stepped back to give Consuela space to come through the doorway. Consuela closed the bedroom door behind her and looked up at Ryan's smiling face without saying anything. Releasing the doorknob, she moved close to Ryan and wound her arms around his neck, pulling his head down for a long kiss. The movement was so smooth, so natural. Ryan had no time to step away, even if he had wanted to. His hands went to the small of her back so he could pull her tighter against him. They broke the kiss, only to start another. It wasn't their first kiss, but this time it was special, and they both knew it. I've wanted that for a long time, Ryan told her when they stopped to breathe. Consuela smiled up at him without speaking. Me too, she said, touching his cheek with her right hand and tracing the outline of his jaw with her fingers. Ryan caught her hand in his and tenderly kissed her fingertips. This wasn't supposed to happen, you know, she said quietly. Ryan looked down at her, tilting his head to one side without saying anything. We were just going to work with each other, to testify for each other, Consuela explained. I'll tell the judge at your divorce hearing that Sean made passes at me, and you tell the judge that he seduced your wife. We'd both get what we wanted, she explained, pausing for another kiss. Then we'd teach them a lesson by getting them in trouble at the bank too, she added softly. This time, Ryan started the kiss. We did it, Consuela said after a moment. We did exactly what we planned and got away with it. And you made sure they never found out about me. Ryan shifted slightly. Consuela was strong-minded, and he hadn't thought his actions would lead back to her. Foolish man, she whispered, seeing his hesitation. I knew you were doing it for Belinda and me. Didn't you know I'd see that? She asked gently. Ryan didn't know what to say, so he stayed silent. You were so strong, so gentle and kind to me and my baby. Didn't you see how Belinda was starting to love you? She continued. How could I not love her? Ryan countered softly. She's part of you and I love you more than life. Didn't you know that? He whispered. She nodded, laying her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. You know I love you that way too? She asked after a short, comfortable silence, looking up to see his eyes. Ryan shook his head slowly. I was only hoping, he said gently. He kissed her again, more firmly this time. Their bodies strained together, and Consuela led him to her bedroom. She stopped short of the bed, suddenly shy, and tried to unbutton her dress. The button wouldn't come undone. Ryan saw her frustration and guessed the reason. Taking her hips in his hands, he turned her gently around. He quickly undid the buttons, letting the top of her dress fall to her waist. His hands caressed her shoulders as he kissed her neck. Her deep sigh and quickened breath told him he was doing the right thing. It didn't take long for them to start making love. They took their time, and it was wonderful. Afterward, as their hearts slowed and they caught their breath, Ryan asked lazily, Think you'll want to keep me around? You reckon we could be compatible? Consuela patted his arm and turned to face him. They kissed gently. Yes, Consuela purred. You just try and get away from me. Ryan chuckled quietly. They were quiet for a moment. In a minute, when you're ready, can I be on top? She asked. She giggled in the dimness. I'm ready, Ryan whispered eagerly. There was no more talk for a long while. The trials for Shawn Michaels and Corey Gilchrist were short. There wasn't much evidence for the U.S. attorney to present, but it was very compelling. The first witnesses were banking experts who explained how accounts are set up in overseas banks to hide income or send fraudulently obtained funds out of U.S. jurisdiction. A stern woman from the State Department testified that none of the accounts had any money left, and the Caribbean governments confirmed this but wouldn't go further. Special Agent Williams testified that he and his partner saw a bank-owned laptop with defendant Michael when they took him into custody. They labeled it as evidence. A computer expert testified that the laptop had programs used by the bank to connect to their server remotely. He showed the jury some screens, including the login page. A representative from the phone company presented phone records for Ryan and Carrie Gilchrist, showing calls lasting 21 to 23 minutes. The prosecutor wrote the times and dates on a whiteboard. There was no evidence of a wireless network set up at Gilchrist's house. A cable company representative said their modem was only connected to the big Dell computer in the home office, with no other connections during the times listed. Then, the information technology manager for the bank testified. Michael's login name and password had been used to access several high-value accounts. He managed wire transfers, some of which were set up to continue even after he signed off. These transfers happened during specific times noted on the whiteboard. The stolen funds were sent to IP addresses linked to offshore banks. The defense objected, arguing the IT manager couldn't know that for sure, but the manager insisted he could trace an IP address as well as anyone, and his testimony was allowed. The next witness, a specialist from the Treasury Department, confirmed the information, saying he often identified bank IPs, and these did match the offshore banks in question. The defense didn't object or question this witness. When the prosecution finished, the defense had little room left. They argued no one saw Shawn Michaels enter the transfer details, suggesting it could have been Carrie Gilchrist or someone else. The Gilchrist home had no security system, so anyone could have been there. They conceded that Shawn and Carrie had an affair, as both had admitted it on videotaped statements. The TV show had shown this multiple times, and the network said it was one of their most watched episodes. The defense questioned whether people having an affair would stop to work on a computer, arguing they could have done the transfers from the office. The prosecution didn't respond to why the transfers were done at the Gilchrist home, as the evidence was clear. The fact that none of the funds were traced to accounts known to either party didn't matter. The FBI testified that there were no unaccounted-for fingerprints or signs of forced entry at the house, and no forensic evidence suggested anyone else had been there. In the end, Michaels was found guilty on all counts. He broke down at the defense table and cried. The Baker County Sheriff's deputies took him into custody, marching him off to jail to await sentencing. Carrie denied knowing Michael's login and password, and despite the lawyer's efforts, the denial held. Some bank employees thought they had seen her enter Michael's information, but the attorney couldn't disprove her denial, likely saving her from conspiracy charges. Carrie's main problem was lying about a trivial matter during an interview a month into the investigation. This led to a false affidavit charge, which the jury quickly found her guilty of. During Michael's sentencing, the jury recommended the sentences run concurrently. The judge agreed, sentencing Michaels to 20 years, with the prison location to be determined later. Carrie received 1 year. As Michaels was led away, Ryan leaned over the railing and whispered, "That's what you get for screwing another man's wife." Only Michaels heard him. Michaels took 2 more steps before the words hit him. He stopped, making the chains on his feet jangle. He turned around to stare at Ryan, his eyes widening. Alarmed, the bailiff tried to catch up, but it was too late. Michaels lunged at Ryan, but the bailiff yanked him back. Michaels started screaming words no one could understand, dragging the much bigger bailiff across the floor. It took 4 officers to control him as he struggled to get to Ryan, still shrieking and fighting his restraints as they carried him out. "Good afternoon, Special Agent Williams. What can I do for you today?" Ryan answered the knock on his office door. He was surprised to see the FBI agent, but didn't show it. He looked down the hallway to see if the agent was alone. The hallway was empty. Come in," Ryan urged. "Mind if I lock the door again?" It was past business hours, and Ryan had locked the door after his secretary left. He didn't like open doors when no one was in the outer office. "Not at all," Williams replied politely. "Just wanted to clear up a couple of things, if that's all right with you." "Sure. What do you got?" Ryan shot back briskly. "Want some coffee?" He pointed to the urn on the side table. The FBI agent hesitated, remembering the strong brew from his last visit, but decided to go for it. "Thank you. Yes," Williams said, taking the mug filled with dark liquid. He took a sip, finding it scalding hot. "What I'm here for, Mr. Gilchrist, is a statement you made to Mr. Michaels. His attorney relayed it to us," Williams said. Ryan's brow furrowed in concentration and surprise. He waited for Williams to continue. "Michaels says you told him at his trial that you arranged for all of this to happen. He accuses you of stealing his laptop and entering the wire transfers to offshore accounts," Williams explained, watching Ryan closely. Ryan's reaction was calm. "That's it?" Ryan asked. "Yes, sir. That's the gist of it," Williams answered. Ryan snorted. "First of all, I never spoke to him at his trial. I was never near him. At his sentencing hearing, I did say something as he passed by. Something like, 'This is what you get for screwing my wife.' That's all I said. He went ballistic and they carried him out. That's the last time I saw him." "I see. Would you care to explain that statement?" Williams asked. Ryan looked confused. "What I just said? Well, it's pretty self-explanatory. He got 20 years for his crimes while he was having an affair with my wife. I told him so. Does that explain it better?" Ryan's eyes flashed with anger. "I see," Williams said, shifting his coffee mug to his left hand before taking a sip. "So if Mr. Michaels alleges you had anything to do with stealing his computer and committing the offenses he's imprisoned for, you deny that?" Ryan snorted again. "You think? You're darn right I deny it," he said formally. Williams watched Ryan over the lip of his mug. Other than irritation, he saw nothing suspicious in Ryan's body language. He considered asking Ryan to come in for a polygraph, but decided against it. In his current mood, Ryan would refuse, which wouldn't prove anything. "Okay," Williams said abruptly, standing up. "I appreciate you taking the time to speak with me, Mr. Gilchrist. If we have anything else, we'll get in contact with you." "Okay," Ryan replied, still visibly annoyed. He took the mug from Williams and put it on the credenza. "Oh," Ryan added, "I'm going to be taking a few weeks off and won't be in the office." "Where will you be, Mr. Gilchrist?" Williams asked automatically. Ryan's eyes narrowed. "Why do you care, Special Agent Williams?" he asked aggressively. "I was told to stay in town during the investigation. The trials are done. 2 people are going to prison and it's over. Are you investigating me, Agent Williams?" "No, sir," Williams answered. "Are you telling me I need to stay where you can find me at a moment's notice?" Ryan pressed. "No, sir," Williams replied. Williams replied, "No need for that. You're correct. There's no active investigation by the Joint Task Force. The Treasury and State Departments are still trying to find the funds in Caribbean banks, but they aren't having any luck. That's all that's happening. Ryan stared at the FBI agent for a long moment, then took a deep breath and held it. His jaw muscles clenched and then relaxed as he exhaled. Okay, sorry. One reason I'm taking some time off is that I'm losing my temper too often, over trivial reasons. I need to recharge. It's been a rough year. If I was out of line, I apologize. Not at all, Williams reassured Ryan quickly. He understood. The man had dealt with a cheating wife, a humiliating TV expose, and the trials. It made sense he might be wound a little tight. You can always reach me, Ryan told the agent, softening slightly. I won't have my cell phone on all the time, but I'll check it regularly. You have the number, right? I don't know where I'll be, probably up at my hunting cabin near Marble Falls, but I might take a road trip to the Grand Canyon or something. I just need to get away. I understand completely, Agent Williams said sympathetically. After a bit more casual chat, Ryan let the FBI agent out and locked the door behind him. It wasn't until Williams was fitting the key into the ignition that he felt uneasy. Shit, he muttered, looking up at the windows of Gilchrist's office. Had Gilchrist just maneuvered him into revealing the status of the investigation? He couldn't decide. Gilchrist had definitely made him feel sorry for him and had deflected his inquiries. As he drove away, he wondered if Gilchrist was that smart, that good at manipulating people. A seed of doubt was planted in his mind. The investigation was dead, but Special Agent Williams would keep an eye out for anything suspicious. Ryan leaned against the wall near the door after the FBI agent left. It took time for his racing heart to calm. He'd been worried he might reveal something to Williams, so he let his anger swell up. The anger had been real, but it was at himself for being afraid, not at the agent. It seemed to have worked. Once composed, he returned to his desk to finish the last stack of papers he needed to sign. His secretary would be in tomorrow for half a day and was expecting them to be done. It was the last task before his few weeks off. In a way, Ryan was glad the FBI agent had come by. It gave him insight into their operation and thinking. It was clear the agent had nothing substantial. If Williams had anything at all, he would have brought a search warrant. He hadn't, which was a good sign. Law enforcement hadn't been able to collect enough probable cause to get a judge to sign off on even a preliminary search. The only search warrant ever served on him was for his home, where the crimes had been committed and the house had been returned months ago. Consuela hadn't been contacted by anyone connected with the investigation. There was no sign the authorities knew she existed. He thought they might be able to start relaxing a little more, not much, but a little. He looked forward to seeing Consuela and Belinda more often. Quiet, honey, Consuela told her daughter. Mama needs to talk to Ryan right now. Ryan will look at your drawing in just a minute. Belinda wasn't happy. She wanted to show Ryan a picture she'd drawn of her mommy and Ryan. To her, it needed to be seen immediately. She flounced into the kitchen, climbed back onto her chair, and began coloring in the figure's clothing. In moments, she had forgotten her mother had interrupted her drawing presentation. So you don't think he had anything to go on? Consuela asked Ryan. Nah, he wasn't even really fishing, Ryan answered, relaxed and unconcerned. If they thought they had anything, they'd have come to the office with search warrants for my office, home, pickup truck, every job site, and probably the hunting lease up at Marble Falls, too. He doesn't have a thing to go on, and I don't see how he could ever show enough probable cause to get search warrants for any of those places. He even admitted the investigation is closed as far as San Antonio is concerned. There's still some work going on overseas, but I gathered there's no chance it'll go anywhere. All he really asked was what I'd meant by what I'd said to Michaels at the trial. I told him, and that was the end of it. Okay, that's good, Consuela whispered, looking relieved. Then she brightened. She had grown weary over the last few months. More often than not, she regretted her initial enthusiasm to cut that man down to size. The plan had worked, but she still worried most of the time. She expected a knock on her door one day, but today, that seemed unlikely. She relaxed and tilted her face up for a kiss from her man. But Mommy, Belinda pleaded with Consuela, everyone else will be there. The little girl, who had just turned 5, was almost in tears when Ryan walked in the kitchen door. It was his 5th day there, and he had given up pretending to stay at the hunting lease. He had been next door, helping the elderly woman who lived there after she almost fell trying to get up her porch steps. Seeing the unhappiness in the room, he said, "Oh, what's wrong?" "Oh, it's her kindergarten class," Consuela said, giving him a troubled glance. "They're having a dad and daughter event tomorrow morning, and well, she doesn't understand." Ryan nodded, feeling as dejected as the others. He knew Consuela had divorced Belinda's father over 4 years ago, just after Belinda was born. Despite a few attempts by the father to see Belinda early on, there had been no contact for over 3.5 years. Ryan pretended to be interested in a dog barking outside while thinking about something he had been planning. He took a deep breath, held it, and let it out slowly. Belinda was so unhappy. It was unfair and beyond her control. Deciding quickly, he walked out the kitchen door to the driveway. He retrieved a small box from under the car's front seat and checked its contents before going back inside. Consuela and Belinda met him at the door, curious. "What?" Consuela started to ask. Ryan smiled mysteriously and took her hand, leading her into the living room. He sat on the couch and patted the cushion beside him. "Honey, what is it?" Consuela asked, wondering what was on Ryan's mind. Ryan cleared his throat. "We've come a long way since we met at the cafe," he began, stammering. "I haven't been good at asking what we should do next or how you feel about things. We just seem to move from one thing to the next without much discussion. But I hope you know I never pushed you into anything, right?" "Ryan, I've never felt pushed," Consuela assured him. "You couldn't make me do anything I didn't want to do." "Yeah, I know," Ryan said. "But now I have to ask you something because we need to know where we stand." He reached for her right hand and held it. "Consuela," he said, his eyes searching hers. She looked a little impatient. Suddenly her eyes widened, and she covered her quivering lips with both hands. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Consuela," Ryan said huskily, "I love you more than words can say. I want you to be... will you be..." "Yes," Consuela whispered softly. Ryan stared at her blankly for a moment. He had prepared for a longer speech and maybe some coaxing. "You will? He asked awkwardly. Consuela nodded, tears filling her eyes. Ryan found the small box and pulled out the diamond ring. It had looked good in the jewelry store, but now he wasn't sure. He took Consuela's hand and slipped the ring on her finger. When it was in place, Consuela began sobbing. Nonplussed, Ryan put his arms around her and patted her back. He wasn't sure what he had done, but she wasn't rejecting his touch, which was a good sign. "Mommy, what's wrong?" Belinda asked, suddenly appearing at Consuela's knee looking ready to cry herself. Belinda had gone to her room to play, but returned when she heard her mother crying. Consuela turned to her daughter, still crying, and pulled her onto her lap. "See what Ryan gave me?" Consuela asked, showing the ring. "Isn't it pretty?" Belinda looked at the ring dubiously. "Why did Ryan give it to you?" "Because we're going to get married, honey," Consuela said, kissing Belinda's cheek. "Isn't that great?" Belinda thought about it for a moment. "I guess. What does married mean?" Consuela laughed and hugged her daughter tighter. "It means you, me, and Ryan are going to live together now. Is that okay?" Consuela asked. Belinda's eyes widened as she began to smile. "Ryan won't have to go home at night anymore?" she asked happily. Ryan and Consuela had established a routine where Ryan would spend the night but leave before dawn, showering and changing into clothes he kept at Consuela's. He'd then wait on the living room sofa for Belinda to wake up, making it seem like he had just arrived. Consuela shook her head at Belinda's question. "Never again," she promised. "Our home is going to be his home, too." "Okay," Belinda said brightly. She thought for a moment, looking at her mother's face. "But why were you crying, Mommy?" she asked again. "Because I'm so happy," Consuela said, smiling down at her. Belinda considered this for a moment. "Well, I won't cry when I'm happy. I laugh when I'm happy," she declared. She started to get down from her mother's lap, but Ryan stopped her. "Belinda," Ryan said gently. The 5-year-old looked up at him. "What?" she asked. "Well, if I marry your mother, that means I'm going to be..." He trailed off, glancing at Consuela over the little girl's head. Consuela nodded, her eyes filling with tears again. "What?" Belinda demanded, impatient. Ryan took a deep breath. "That means I'm going to be your daddy," he said slowly. if that's all right with you." Belinda looked at him seriously, her eyes wide. She leaned back to look at her mother for confirmation. "Really?" she said, turning back to Ryan. "You'll be my daddy?" Ryan nodded, too choked up to speak. He cleared his throat. "If you want me to be," he replied after a moment. Belinda had no hesitation. "I do," she said sweetly. She held out her arms and leaned toward him. Ryan took her into his arms, kissing the top of her head. She smiled up at him, wiggling around until she was on her knees, able to throw her arms around his neck and hug him tightly. Ryan lost his ability to speak again, the lump in his throat not going away for a long while. When Consuela tucked Belinda into bed, she reminded the little girl that now she had a daddy to take her to Father-Daughter Day the next morning. Belinda's eyes widened in excitement, and it took nearly an hour for her to calm down enough to sleep. The next morning, Belinda immediately made her way into her mother's bedroom. Ryan had spent the whole night with his new fiancée, and it didn't faze Belinda at all. "Tommy and Maria and Lisa," she said, referring to her friends at kindergarten, "all told me their mommies and daddies always sleep in the same bed." Ryan was tempted to ask how the subject came up, but Consuela's elbow in his ribs stopped him. He was glad he didn't ask. It was probably best not to know. Belinda could hardly contain her excitement long enough to eat breakfast. She played with her bowl of Fruit Loops, but it was clear she wasn't going to eat more. She managed to drink all her milk, but that was the extent of her patience. She danced down the sidewalk to Ryan's pickup, refusing to let go of his hand even for a moment. She proudly introduced Ryan to all her friends and teachers. "This is my new daddy," she told everyone. Meanwhile, Ryan's ex-wife, Carrie, sat at a small picnic table in the shade of a big tree in the visitor area of the prison camp. It was a pleasant, well-maintained grassy area between the headquarters building and one of the dormitories. "I don't know how to start, Ryan. I guess just thanks for coming," she said hesitantly. "The only condition your attorney insisted on was that I deliver your copy of the decree to you personally," Ryan replied evenly. He was trying hard not to inject any acrimony into what he was sure would be the last time he saw his ex-wife. The provision for him to deliver the documents to Carrie had been the only thing she'd asked for. She hadn't attempted to contact him after the night she and Shawn Michaels had been ambushed at the nightclub. Even when she'd been indicted, she'd never tried to contact him. That had been Ryan's wish, though he was a little surprised she hadn't at least tried. "And now I find out I can't actually do what you wanted me to do," Ryan remarked. "The visitor regulations won't allow me to bring in any paperwork or anything but what I've got on." "Yes, I learned about that after I got here," Carrie replied. "They already told me you got special permission to just drop it off with the staff instead of mailing it like the rules say. I appreciate that, I really do." Ryan shrugged uncomfortably. What Carrie appreciated was of no concern to him anymore. Her betrayal had pushed him away from her, and he no longer cared. He glanced around the visitors area. Bryan Women's Federal Prison Camp was a minimum security prison. There weren't any watchtowers, tall fences, or barbed wire he had thought he would see. The only thing separating the facility from the surrounding community was a standard chain-link fence, no different from those found dividing one backyard from another in a suburban neighborhood. The outside walls of all the buildings were beige stucco with red tile roofs, typical of Southwest architecture. The grass was lush and green, the trees tall with wide branches that provided plenty of shade. The grounds were well kept with no litter anywhere. The place looked pleasant and peaceful. Ryan wondered what it was like inside. "So what do we do now?" Carrie asked softly. She sat straight with her hands in her lap. According to the rules, she wasn't allowed to touch Ryan after a brief hug. She knew Ryan wouldn't have liked that, so they settled for quiet hellos. Carrie was aware the prison staff was watching them closely. "We don't do anything, Carrie," Ryan replied, quickly looking back at her. "There is no we anymore. That's what a divorce is about." Carrie's eyes dropped. She was disappointed, but not surprised. "Ryan, I'm really sorry. I messed things up for us. What I did was wrong, and I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. Please believe me." Ryan shrugged and adjusted his sunglasses. The sun was high, reflecting off the pale walls into his eyes. "I'm a little confused, Carrie. Exactly how did you think sleeping with your boss wouldn't hurt me?" Carrie winced and bit her lips. "You weren't ever supposed to find out, Ryan. I know that sounds stupid now, but I thought if you didn't know, it was like..." She trailed off, searching for the right words. Ryan turned on the bench to face her. He didn't recognize her in the prison uniform. Her face was thinner, her green eyes seemed too big, and her cropped blonde hair was limp. She looked like she carried a heavy load. She was a stranger who had wronged him. "What you did was still wrong, Carrie," he said brusquely. "Whether I knew or not." He shut his eyes and tried to control his breathing. "Sorry. I don't know why I bother. It hurts, even if someone doesn't realize it yet." "I know," Carrie said softly. "I didn't know it then, but I do now." "Too little, too late, Carrie," Ryan said without sympathy. "Yes, you're right," she said unhappily. "I can't change what I did, Ryan, but I'm being punished big time now. It won't happen again." "You're being punished for lying to a federal investigator, not for wrecking our marriage. Don't go there." Ryan shifted and prepared to stand. "Our divorce is just an administrative detail. It's not punishment. You killed our marriage. I just got a judge to confirm it with his signature." Carrie looked at him unhappily, tears glistening in her eyes. "I know, Ryan. I know I messed things up, and there's nothing I can do to fix it," she said, trying not to cry. "Life's about choices, Carrie. You made bad ones, and now you have to live with them," he said, making sure his tone wasn't accusatory. "Is there any chance we could—" Carrie began, but Ryan shook his head decisively. "No, Carrie," he said, taking off his sunglasses and putting them on the table. "I don't want to be mean, but there's nothing to be gained by dragging this out. Look, Carrie, I'll be getting married next week." Carrie was shocked. She hadn't expected this. I don't know what to say. I hope you'll be very happy," she finally said, tears threatening to fall. "I didn't mean for it to come out like that," Ryan said apologetically. "I thought I'd write you a letter or something." After a long silence, Carrie managed to control herself. "I do hope you and—" "What's her name?" "Consuela," Ryan answered. "Consuela Robertson." "Consuela, that's a beautiful name," Carrie said without bitterness. "I really do hope you'll be very happy." She tried to smile but looked confused. "You know her," Ryan said quietly. "She used to work at the bank. She was one of the people who filed sexual harassment suits. My lawyer dug up a lot of information on them. Consuela and I met, and the rest is history." Carrie looked at Ryan for a long time without saying anything. "Well, I hope you both will be very happy," she said finally. "I'm sure she won't hurt you like I did," she added, bitterness in her tone. Ryan ignored it. Carrie had lost the right to be bitter about his choices. He stood but didn't immediately leave. "I won't be coming here again," he said. "Consuela and I, well, you know." Carrie nodded. "Goodbye, Carrie," he said. "I hope when you get out of here, things turn out well for you." "Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate that," Carrie replied. She stood as well but kept the picnic table between them. Ryan nodded and turned away. After a moment, he turned back. "There's something I don't understand. You don't have to answer if you don't want to, but why? Why did you even take up with that jerk in the first place?" Carrie had expected this question. She thought she would be careful with her answer, but there was no longer any reason for that. Ryan had made it clear there was no future for their relationship as she'd hoped. She hesitated briefly. "I didn't start out to cheat on you," she said frankly. "I was happy. It looked like we were getting back to where we were before the first time." She glanced up at her ex-husband guiltily. This was the second affair she'd engaged in. "I concentrated on just us for the longest time," she continued. "Then I got a nice promotion at the bank, and I lucked into a couple of other things. More responsibility and perks. Well, Ryan, I liked being in charge of things, and I saw I could go higher in management there." She lifted her hands helplessly, her face twisted with distaste. "It was so wrong, but I figured out Shawn Michaels was my ticket upstairs, and I decided I'd let him. Then I'd have sex with him. The money was getting better, almost as much as you were bringing home. You know, it wasn't like he was a very good person, Ryan. I never thought he was. I was never in love with him. In fact, he was a pretty rotten individual. I read somewhere that people always affair down. We have affairs with people who make us look good by comparison. I guess that's true. It's what I did. Once involved with him, it was easy to get on an ego trip, Ryan," she said wearily. "I started to believe the world I shared with just him was fine. I thought he and I knew who we were and exactly what we wanted out of life. I had this confidence I didn't have before. You see, it wasn't true, but that's how I felt. Carrie's face and tone showed deep unhappiness. I can't justify it, Ryan. I was caught up in getting that next promotion and being happy with someone else giving me attention. I think I went a little crazy. I'm sorry, I really am. Ryan took a moment to digest what she'd said. He shook his head. And the things people have told me about the way you talked about me? About our life together? He asked carefully. He couldn't hint that he'd heard her spiteful remarks on the tape recorder in the videos he'd made of her and Sean early on. Carrie stared at him in surprise. She thought for a minute. Well, guilt, I guess, she said finally. I didn't feel good about what I was doing at first. I think I started picking fights with you and stuff so I could just keep going. After a while, I didn't feel so guilty anymore if I could blame you. You know, I began to see everything differently. Every time you were short with me or didn't agree with me, whether it was real or imagined, it gave me an excuse to see one more thing in a bad light. It got easy to make myself the victim. I started seeing you as holding me back, pressuring me to be something I couldn't be. I saw you still weren't trusting me from the first affair, and I began to resent it. I thought you were trying to control me. Then, in my mind, what I was doing wasn't so bad. If I made myself believe you were the bad guy, then how could I be at fault, right? It helped make my guilt a little less each time I did something I shouldn't. I needed that. I couldn't have kept on without it. And I had to keep on. It was like a compulsion or something. I don't know what else to say, Ryan. It was wrong. But I couldn't see it at the time. It was like being in a fog, and I couldn't find my way out. I didn't mean to put my husband second to another man, but I was delusional. I did it, and I'm so ashamed. Ryan gazed at her for a moment longer. He shook his head. You rewrote most of our history together, he told her. From what I've been able to gather, some of our former friends have told me a lot of what you said was pretty damn vicious. And it was all because you wanted to prostitute yourself to get ahead. What? Carrie protested, shocked. I never— Sure you did, Ryan shot back angrily. A hooker has sex with other men for cash. You screwed Michaels and whoever else because you wanted a bigger paycheck. There's no difference. You just did it with a better-dressed clientele, that's all. Ryan's voice was heavy with revulsion and suppressed anger. My wife, the hooker, he said thickly. Good riddance. He turned and strode quickly across the yard to the nearest control point. He didn't look back. In the middle of the night, Carrie sat bolt upright in the darkness on her cot. You son of a bitch, she screamed in her sleep. Her subconscious mind had made a connection she hadn't seen while awake. Carrie had realized almost immediately that Ryan's fiancée once worked in Shawn Michaels' division when Ryan gave her Consuela's full name, but it hadn't seemed worthy of comment. It took her until now to remember that Consuela had the skills to access the bank accounts and could have done what everyone blamed Shawn for. As Carrie slept, her unconscious mind connected this to what her lawyer had told her weeks earlier. Shawn Michaels had claimed Ryan was responsible for everything. His attorney had tried to get a new trial for Shawn based on this, but the judge dismissed the motion. Carrie's shouts disturbed the dorm, causing a stir. Several women got up to use the restroom, and a guard came to Carrie's room, warning her she would be punished and might be transferred to a higher security institution. It took her a long time to fall back asleep. The next morning, Carrie's excitement faded with the first light of day, replaced by a feeling of hopelessness. She knew Shawn's accusations had gone nowhere, and she doubted hers would either. She understood her ex-husband too well. Ryan wouldn't have mentioned his new wife's name if he thought it could lead to something. He had likely covered his tracks well. No one would be able to prove how he and Consuela had managed this. Ryan had said the divorce wasn't punishment for her cheating. It was just an administrative detail. The humiliation on the TV show was just another detail. No, her real punishment was the year in prison. And knowing Ryan had known all along and set her and Shawn up, and there was nothing she could do about it. Biting her lips, Carrie forced herself to get up and head to the dining hall. She needed the calories for the day's work detail, digging 3 new vegetable gardens and 1 flower garden in front of the main building. That evening, she would mark off another day on her calendar. 319 more days to go. According to Texas law, 31 days after Ryan's divorce was finalized, he and Consuela were married in her hometown. Most of the town attended the reception at the VFW hall. A few hours after he proposed, Ryan asked when they would get married and start planning. Consuela told him her mother and she had already done most of the planning. They just needed a date. Smiling at his surprise, she assured Ryan that her family knew he would propose. It was only a matter of when. Ryan was initially stunned, but soon accepted it. Consuela loved him, he loved her, and they both loved Belinda. That was enough for him. He even rented a copy of Steel Magnolias to understand his boundaries better. 3 weeks after the wedding, Ryan and Consuela took their marriage certificate to an attorney, and Ryan began the process of adopting Belinda. Her birth father was easily found near Santa Fe, New Mexico. He was in hard times and happily signed the adoption papers for $50 and 2 bottles of cheap wine. The private investigators videotaped the event for proof. 3 years later, Belinda's biological father was found dead, and his passing generated only a brief obituary. Belinda adjusted well to having 2 parents. Ryan and Consuela had worried because she had only known her mother, but she saw it as an opportunity to be loved by 2 people instead of having 2 disciplinarians. She took full advantage of this. After a year of having Ryan all to herself, Consuela got pregnant with the first of their 3 more children, Jeanette, Rosita, and Roberto, born 14 to 16 months apart. Belinda welcomed them as additions to the family, even telling Trish at the cafe, "We are pregnant again," when Consuela started showing with Roberto. Carrie Gilchrist served her sentence quietly. Her sentence was too short for a halfway house furlough, so she spent the entire 365 days in FPC Bryan, Texas. When she got out, she found that Ryan had been generous with her share of the proceeds from the sale of their house and other property. She took the money, bought a beauty salon in Fort Worth, and started a new career. The felony on her record barred her from returning to banking, but she didn't miss it much. Without fully understanding why Carrie never mentioned her suspicions about Consuela, she decided years later that it had been part of her atonement for her past actions. Shawn Michaels didn't adapt well to prison life initially. He disliked the staff, especially the management, and treated the guards with contempt. After a few months in a medium-security facility where the guards left him unprotected, he changed his attitude and became a model prisoner. He was eventually transferred to lower-security prisons, spending the last 16 years teaching other inmates math, reading, and writing. He found this more rewarding than anything he had known before and became an advocate for inmate rights. Sharon Michaels stayed with Shawn for appearances during the trial but divorced him after his sentencing. She moved back to Colorado to be near her parents. A few years later, she married a Colorado State Patrol lieutenant after ensuring he agreed never to stray, even joking about doing a Lorena Bobbitt on him if he did. Her new husband never imagined cheating on her. Special Agent Stan Williams never lost the feeling that Ryan Gilchrist had something to do with the bank fraud. Even after transferring to different cities, he kept an eye on the case, but nothing, not even Ryan's marriage to Consuela, warranted reopening it. Williams eventually retired and started a small security firm in upstate New York. Consuela's great-uncle Roberto was touched when he learned Ryan and Consuela named their youngest child after him. He visited from Mexico City whenever he could, forming tight bonds with the children. The bank never recovered the $9 million stolen and eventually wrote it off. Administrative changes followed, and none of the bank officers involved remained in management. Parker Winston became the chief financial officer and later retired to the Bahamas. The $7 million that Roberto collected stayed in Mexico City. Ryan and Consuela didn't need or want the money. Roberto used it to support his causes. 3 years after the case closed, a freighter delivered arms to a guerrilla unit in Venezuela, which later made significant gains. The CIA and other agencies never discovered the funding source. Consuela's second cousin, Richard, helped Ryan destroy the laptop they had left with him. They used the hard drive for target practice and buried the remains in an old mine, collapsing it with dynamite. Ryan and Consuela never felt guilty about stealing the money. They sought revenge for the wrongs committed against them and believed they were justified. Getting Shawn and Carrie fired wouldn't have been enough. The prison sentences were crucial. Ryan often remarked that 100 years earlier, he would have been expected to shoot both Shawn and Carrie. The harsh retribution allowed Ryan and Consuela to move on with their lives. They settled all accounts when their first baby arrived, bought out a local rancher, and moved their family a few miles out of town. Ryan's small construction company leveled the old buildings and built their first complete structure, a sprawling ranch-style home designed by an architect Consuela hired. She worked closely with the architect until everything was just the way she wanted it. Once the children were old enough, the family spent some of their summer vacations camping in the most remote parts of the Llano Estacado, where Ryan showed them the secret places his grandfather had shown him. Belinda grew to love the high desert so much that she studied archaeology in college, focusing on ancient American Indian lore. She married another student in the same field a few years after they graduated, and they spent much of their time in complete isolation on the vast plains. Though he often got choked up seeing how much his oldest daughter loved him, Belinda only made Ryan cry twice in her life. The first time was when Belinda introduced him to her kindergarten class as her daddy. He managed to hold back his tears enough that only the closest observers noticed his moist eyes. The second time was when tears flowed down his cheeks as Belinda invited him into her hospital room to meet the newborn child in her arms, a boy she said she was naming Ryan. Thanks for listening to One Infidelity Hit. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop us a like.